Good afternoon. This is the March 6, 2014 meeting of the Board of Adjustment. We're here to hear special exemptions, variances from the zoning code, oil and gas related cases, and the decision of appeals of a director. We have a pretty full agenda today, so we'll go ahead and start it. The first agenda item would be to receive the meeting minutes of the January 2nd and the February 20th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? And the motion carries. The next item would be continuances and withdrawals. Kathy, do you have some continuances?
We have two continuances today. Item number 7, case number 13864 is requesting a continuance to March 20th, and item number 9, case number 13598 is requesting a continuance to April 17th.
Okay, is there anybody in opposition to the continuance? Sir, please step forward.
We've put together a neighborhood association.
Okay, could you state, are you speaking on behalf of the
I'm
group?
speaking for myself. I am the president of the HOA.
Okay, could you please state your name and address for the record?
My name is Alan Little. My address is 13019 Blue Canyon Circle, Oklahoma City, 73142.
And so
Just so I'm clear, are we here on, is he here on 13864?
He's on item number 7.
item number 7, 13864, yes,
Okay.
he's in opposition to
Thanks.
the continuance of 13864.
I think, do you want me to plead my case or why I object?
Why you object to the continuance, not to the merits of the case? We're just continuing.
I think it's a slam dunk. I think he's dragging us out. We've brought a bunch of neighbors down here to support it, and we've taken time off of work. I don't think it's right for him to do this to us.
Is the applicant here?
I'm Lex Godania with MGR Inc., Edmond. This continuous deal we just discussed with the city engineer, it just came around 12:45. That he needs to review it a little bit in detail. It's not my decision, and I agreed that you can have some more time if you want. And it was not anything that we wanted to really give any hardship to the opponent.
Questions of the applicant from the staff or from the members of the board?
I was just going to comment. I'm going to, I think, side with the neighbors that have taken their time to come down here and to object. I don't understand the grounds for their continuance.
I'd make a motion to deny the continuance.
There's been a motion to deny the continuance. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the motion to deny the continuance.
Do we dismiss, or do we have to wait?
You'll have to wait. That's right. They'll have to wait.
Are you going to continue?
The motion is deny the continuance and hear it, that case today.
And we need to reference the case number.
Is case number 13864. Motion to deny the continuance. All those in favor of denying the continuance will hear the case today. And then we need to vote separately on case number 9, item number 13598.
I'd make a motion to continue that. Is it to 320?
417.
To 417, please.
Okay, there's a motion. Second?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Okay. The motion carried. That brings us to our first case.
Item number 1, case number 13865, request of Dave Goodman for a variance to the drainage ordinance to allow a single-family residence with basement located at 3260 Via Esperanza.
Come on. Could you step forward, sir? And please, for purposes of the record, state your name and address.
Sure, thank you. My name is Mike Hancock. Dave Goodman is out of town today, and he asked me to represent him today. Look at my paper so I can see. First off, I'm a licensed engineer in the state of Kansas and Oklahoma. I'm representing Mr. Goodman today for the Goodman Companies. Mr. Goodman is a general contractor on the project. The property of concern is a proposed home located at Esperanza 1 subdivision on North May. The subdivision is mainly a single-family housing division of 29 lots, 3 commercial lots. The lot is in this discussion for variance of Lot 16, Block 1, at 3280 Via Esperanza. The purpose of the variance request is simply to apply for a minimum height elevation to the lowest opening versus the minimum floor elevation. The home will be constructed to all the setback requirements as depicted to the site plan and will comply with all Oklahoma City building codes. The lowest opening to the house would be the garage door opening on the north side of the house. The garage opening would be approximately 2 feet above the drainage flume or 1 foot above the minimum floor elevation. So the house would be constructed above the minimum requirements. The floor elevation of the main floor will be 6 inches above the garage door opening or 1 foot 6 inches above the minimum. The basement openings, staircase, and window well will be the same level as the house floor, 1 foot 6 inches above the minimum floor elevations. The drainage will be established to exceed the minimum fall away from the house per the 2009 International Residential Code. This would be 6 inches from the sill plate to the ground, plus another 6 inches in the first 10 feet away from the house. The fall would actually occur about 2% away from the house in all directions. The land to the west of this property descends to an elevation that's depicted in the Federal Information Rate Map. In other words, this house is above the Federal Information Rate Map floodplains. The elevation of the house at this location do not pose any risk to the flooding of the 100-year storm runoff as designed for the street drainage system. Given the variance to apply the minimum elevation to the lowest opening would allow the owners to construct a home with a storm shelter or a basement in a portion of the home for the safety of their family or a tornado in a heavy wind event. The shelter would be a waterproof structure with 2 forms of egress located in the southeast section of the home away from the storm drain.
Okay, and I know we have a representative from the city here to add some comment.
Good afternoon, Adir Agrawal with Public Works. I'm the floodplain manager for the city. What Mr. Goodman,
Mr.
Hancock described is correct, that what elevations he's proposing, what is called in our floodplain language as floodproofing. If you look at 16-74, which is also included on second page, the text of that, is it basically floodproofing is not permitted for residential structures. So, and their contention is correct that it is not a FEMA requirement or FEMA flooding source, but still it's part of our drainage ordinance requirement. And FEMA has given Oklahoma Water Resources Board authority to monitor a city's program for how we enforce our drainage ordinance. So by not enforcing this requirement of minimum finished floor for the basement, we will be not complying with our drainage ordinance requirement. So basically, for them to comply, we wouldn't have any objection to allowing them to proceed this way. The only thing we need is a letter from OWRB saying that they don't have any objection and they will not count this against our program, National Flood Insurance Program, that has almost 3,000 subscribers. So that's what we're asking them to do. In this case, we wouldn't have any problem allowing this to proceed further with that kind of letter from OWRB.
And you'd be willing to provide that letter, sir?
We can attempt to provide that letter. However, we have no relationship with that organization, but we'd be glad to contact that organization. This application or this ordinance actually applies to all subdivisions in all of Oklahoma City that have drainage flumes adjacent to them, and it prohibits any homeowner from putting in a storm shelter in those locations. And regardless of the elevation, regardless of the slope, regardless of the terrain associated with each one of those. So we're not here to fight the long-term battle. We're here to fight just for this one particular job. And the long term, however, the city ordinance needs to be reevaluated in order to address a different type of construction.
And that's really outside of our purview. We can't address that issue here.
Yes, absolutely.
But if you're willing to make it conditional on what the city is asking for, I think that's the only way we can
And I think
help you
that's
out.
twofold. It would be the National Flood Insurance Program and some type of verification or assurances from the Oklahoma Water Resources Board.
The first one would be, again,
The National Flood Insurance Program. Is that what you
Well,
want?
actually, Oklahoma Water Resources Board monitors it for FEMA.
Okay.
So that's all.
That's all you need is the letter.
That's all we
Okay.
need.
yeah, so it's,
But just to address what he had said about the other locations, we're trying to address that issue too through the change of ordinance, FYI.
Are you okay with the,
if that's what
conditional
required, we'd be
approval?
glad to do that.
Any other questions from the board?
I guess the only question I have is sort of a procedural one, whether we should require that to be done before we vote on this matter. In other words, continue this and see whether they make progress in that way, or whether, we should vote now conditioning it. I think that creates kind of a burden on us to have to keep up with it. Do you have an opinion for me?
Well, the staff wouldn't issue a building permit until they got that letter.
Okay.
So that's the check on it, is once the building permit, that would have to be included before it would be issued.
We would be glad
I
to
understand
provide that
that.
letter to the city and be conditional upon that.
Yeah, I didn't really have a problem with the decision to build the house that way, even though I'd take issue with some of the verbiage in here, but I don't want to jeopardize the city's FEMA program and the flood insurance. So, do we have any protesters?
Other cities, other municipalities, Edmond, Norman, all approach this differently in the fact that they don't utilize that basement lowest level elevation. They use the opening. And so, other cities, Wichita, Kansas City, so on, it's just we didn't adopt that when we wrote it.
To avoid everybody having to come back, I'll move approval with the condition that the applicant obtain the appropriate waiver letter or whatever he needs from Oklahoma Water Resources Board.
There's a motion
I'll second that.
and a second. All in favor? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Item number 2, case number 13862, request of Jason Lawson for a variance to permit a single-family residence encroaching the 25-foot platted front building line located at 4916 Fawn Run Drive.
How you doing? Jason Lawson, 4916 Fawn Run Drive, applicant. And I purchased this house in 2010. At the time of the closing, it was revealed that it had this defect as far as the construction. It was too close to the curb by varying distances depending on where you measure the setback violation. I took the title because it was kind of revealed in the 12th hour. Took title subject to this defect, but I'm now at a point where I'm attempting to sell it, and it's been an obstacle in being able to get a contract in the past without being able to get this variance secured for the new property owner. So I'm here seeking to get a variance for it.
Questions of the board?
Anybody opposing this application that you're aware of?
No, I've spoke with all my neighbors. They don't have any problem with it. So.
I'd make a motion to approve the variance.
Second.
Motion is second. Cast your votes. Motion approves. Thank you.
Item number 3, case number 13866, request of Fairview Farms 4 for a variance to the required number of parking spaces located at 1500 Northwest 158th Street.
I have to recuse myself. I'm president of the Fairview Farm HOA.
Good afternoon. Tim Johnson on behalf of the applicant. This is a unique little enclave of a development that was finalized in about 07 or 08, about the time the market started dipping. It was the last 10 acres of the overall Fairview Farms development, which is approximately a quarter section of land. Many of you know that that's been a very successful development. Well, this is a unique design that really falls in line with what a lot of the Planning Commission is wanting these developers to do, and that's to push the buildings up closer to the street, access the drives or the garages in the back, creating more of a walkable neighborhood. Unfortunately, the parking requirements for a community pool, which only serves these lots, requires approximately 12 spaces, which would be a lot of pavement and unnecessary because this is, as you can see, this is the overall layout. All the lots are well within walkable distance. And so that's, there is parking being provided for handicap accessibility to the pool. The rest of the addition will have sidewalks. They're all stamped, colored pavement sidewalks. So we're here to request that variance to allow for the area to remain walkable and not have to have a lot of excess paving for parking.
Questions?
If there are no protesters, I would make a motion to approve.
Second.
Got a motion and seconds, or any other discussion? If not, cast your votes.
Thank you.
Item number 4, case number 13595, request of Uno Moss Restaurant and Bar to amend a condition of the board's order pursuant to the approval of case number 13420 concerning the hours of operation located at 2823 South Agnew Avenue.
Hello, Dusty Embry, 421 College Avenue, Norman, Oklahoma, representing Uno Moss KDE LLC.
I'm Chad Stalkup, the current building owner.
Go ahead and speak to your application.
Okay. Yes, we obtained a variance, which you see there, for a restaurant bar access in 2823 at South Agnew. It was a parking issue, so we had to obtain parking on an off-site location to go with it. So we obtained a variance for it. In obtaining the variance, hours of operation were brought up because of the issue of the parking lot being joined for another business. So the hours were suggested that they not open until after normal business hours for the other businesses around. So 5 p.m. would be our opening hours. The closing hours, when set, our representative misspoke. It got set at midnight all the way through. We're an ABC2 overlay, wanted to operate as a restaurant bar, and we're here to request to operate as a restaurant bar with the same closing hours as normal, 2 a.m. on weekends.
And we received a letter in protest from Ms. Lemon. Is she present today? Have you spoken with her about her concerns?
No, sir. No, I was informed, I guess, that they attempted to send an email to me, but the email address on file, I guess it got rejected back. So this was the first I've heard of it. I was reading through there and I saw that some issues with car screeches and everything. Keep in mind, we're not open at this point. We have never been open. So the car screeches she's hearing is, I guess, a result of being at Southwest 28th and Agnew.
Not the result of your business, correct?
Correct.
Questions? Go ahead, Janice.
I am confused about why this is in the posture that it's in. They have the zoning that they need. They've got an ABC2, is that correct?
Yes.
And so it was an order that had to do with the fact that they couldn't meet their parking requirements that imposed these hours of operation. Is that how we find ourselves here?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Can you address the original application, so maybe that would give some clarification?
Yes, sir. Okay, the building itself, it's an older building. It's a large building, and the parking for it, obviously, back in the day was different. And switching over to an ABC2 overlay for the square footage of the building, which we've dedicated a lot of it to storage and cut a bunch of it down, we still were short parking spaces. So in order to obtain the parking spaces, we had to go out and look for businesses around Agnew Door and Glass south of us. They have a large lot on the north edge of their building that they don't use. We got in agreements with them to utilize their parking lot during our business hours. And once again, when we set the variance, the main concern was the opening hours. That's how we're using Agnew Door and Glass's parking during their business hours, which they close at 5. They didn't want us to impose on the other businesses, because we're going to be using parking spaces there. So that was why the ordinance was set to only open after which they've closed, 5 p.m. So our hours were set for 5 p.m., and then in asking the business hours of which we were wanting to operate, our representative said closing at midnight on weekends, which we want to close at 2 a.m. on weekends. That's the 5 p.m. I see that it says 10 a.m. to 2 a.m. on the proposed hours. We're not proposing 10 a.m. We understand the 5 p.m. and why it should be 5 p.m. In our request, it was to operate as normal ABC2 restaurant bar hours. And I guess interpreting that, it was written down as 10 a.m. But we're okay with the 5 p.m. We understand we're utilizing other parking and not to impede on their business hours and their parking. 5 p.m. is okay.
And there's no one here in opposition today? I'd make a motion to approve.
I have a motion and a second. Second. Cast your votes. You're approved. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, sir.
Item number 5, case number 13860, request of Rollman Welding Service for a variance to the accessory building regulations located at 9817 Northwest 100th Street.
Sam Roman, 9817 Northwest 100th Street.
I'm the homeowner of 9817 Northwest 100th Street. It's a new development in Beldera Housing Estate right off of Morgan Road. The housing development has been approved for shops. And when I started purchasing this piece of property, the developer had an option for you to purchase a shop that they had their contractors and builders build. In the interim, when I got ready to purchase the shop, they quit selling the shops because they weren't getting the appraised values for them. So we ended up having to purchase and design our own. My particular thinking and theory on this one was this building came out of Canada. It was designed to withstand the snow weight, the wind, the bad weather we have here in Oklahoma City. And it's also something where you can put petitions on it to add on if I need to make it bigger. But the Oklahoma Highway Patrol has a building similar about 2 blocks from me. Verizon cellular towers in my backyard has a building just like this, other than they made the corner square.
Yeah, the problem we're having is it's a round top, it's not a hip or a gable. His homeowner association does require a brick front. It will be a brick front and very presentable building. I think we submitted a picture of that.
Questions?
Have you seen the letter from Mr. Bells where he provides us with the HOA covenants and says one of the requirements is that you have Architectural Control Committee approval on the building? Has that been obtained?
Wouldn't know where to even begin to get that.
Well, is there such a committee in existence?
Not that I know of.
We do have stamped, it's stamped through an engineer. The prints are stamped from Oklahoma Engineer.
I also took this to the homeowners association about 2 weeks ago, and I laid the prints and everything out. So if anyone had any objection that they could object in, I don't want to offend nobody. And then also, when I first got the prints and stuff, I took it to my sales rep, and he had no problem with it. It was approved. As long as I kept the brick facing on the front, the distance from the house, from the fence, and all that's going to be met. The only issue is the corners of it. This is what they refer to as an art building, so we don't have square corners on it. and we can put a piece of straight metal there where we can have like an eave, if that's what needs to be done to get this through.
Okay, so what was the response of the homeowners association?
No problem.
Okay, is
Some
anybody...
of the homeowners of the same area, neighbors, have a copy where they signed off on it and said they had no problem with it.
Okay, so these neighbors are approving, correct?
Correct.
And the HOA did not object, correct?
Did not object.
And no one's here from the HOA today in opposition?
No one I've ever known to be in any objection.
I'd make a motion to approve the variance.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Motion's approved. Thank you, sir.
Item number 6, case number 13863, application for special exception of Troy Allman to allow a RV campground and a variance to the minimum 300-foot separation from a residential district located at 3000 North I-35 Service Road.
Hello, my name is Troy Allman. My address is 3000 North I-35 Service Road.
Jack Roth, 26446 Horseshoe Circle, Purcell.
Okay. Go ahead and speak to your application, sir.
We've applied for the application for a special exemption to allow us to have the RV park there. We plan to have a family-oriented RV park. We're within 2 miles of 4 museums, the racetrack, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, and several other Oklahoma attractions there.
And you're asking for a variance from the setback requirement to be 280 feet instead of 300 feet.
Yes,
So
sir.
you're asking for a variance of 20 feet.
Yes, sir.
And I just received your letter from your investment group encouraging the board for the approval. I do note that you are close to some R1 in your development. Have any of the neighbors reached out to you in opposition
No, sir.
to your request? Is there anybody here in opposition to his request? Okay. Any questions from the board?
Are you actually operating an RV park on the premises currently?
We did have some RV spots there, yes, ma'am. They've been there for the last 6 years.
And what you're really asking for is the ability to add 18 pads, is that it?
Yes, ma'am. The things that are there now, they're old and out of date, so what we want to do is we want to get rid of those and put the new ones and make it nice and pretty for the Oklahoma City area so it's not an eyesore and whatnot. We spent a lot of time and money upgrading the property and making it look nice so it's not an eyesore.
Can you tell me the favorable considerations that staff found for this? JJ?
RV campgrounds are commonly seen along the interstate highways. There's many throughout the city and in the outlying areas, so it's not uncommon to see these type of developments along the interstate.
Okay. All right. I'd make a motion to approve the variance.
There's been a motion.
Second.
Motion is second. Cast your votes. Okay. You've been approved, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Item number 7, case number 13864, request of Delaney Meyer Land Company for a variance to the arterial sidewalk requirement located at 7816 West Memorial Road.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, before we go any further here, my understanding of the application was for 2 things, a special exception and a variance. He was asking for a special exception to operate a campground.
We did not include that. I missed.
And it seems to me that
Was it not both? I thought in my mind it was both.
Oh, I only heard the variance.
The variance.
State that correctly, I intended it for it to be voted. If we need to fix that, I'm more happy to try to fix
Why don't we just, for purposes of the record, just to back up, why don't we just go ahead, why don't you, before he speaks, make the motion for the special exemption for the RV park?
I'll make that motion at this time.
Okay?
And I'll second it.
And we'll vote on that. Okay, my apologies. Thank you, Janice. I didn't make it clear.
Yeah.
Well, just, either way, it's on for the record, so.
Thank you.
I'm Lakshman Godania with MGR Inc. We are engineers. I was the engineer from phase 1 to this last phase. This is totally 115 acres of subdivision divided into 4 phases. This is the last one, about 11.29 acres. There is very vast amenities in here, about 23 acres of lakes, 2 lakes. There is children's playground, a fishing dock, sidewalks. Under first subdivision, edition number 1, this sidewalk along common areas was not required. But the owner, developer, decided that we should have it. It will be a beneficial thing to the future homeowners. So he did put sidewalks. It was combined concrete in the beginning and then asphalt. And there is a comment from the opponents about the asphalt sidewalk. I have photographs. You may have those photographs, but asphalt is not as strong as concrete. It does require maintenance, and this sidewalk was dedicated to the homeowners, and it was their responsibility to do it. But I'm coming to the point. We have close to about more than a mile of sidewalk along the common areas. Our reason for requesting not to put sidewalk along Memorial, it is a very rolling street. If we put the sidewalk there, it will be very difficult. I mean, extremely difficult now to provide for handicap requirements, 2% cross slope and 5% maximum longitudinal slope. Plus, it's not going anywhere. About a mile to the east, there is nothing people can do, no sidewalk. I know the policy is to provide a sidewalk, so ultimately it will connect the pieces. If we go ahead and put the sidewalk, whenever they do Memorial, and ultimately they have to do it, this sidewalk is going to be removed, going to waste. Plus, there is a big drainage crossing. We have to really put a big drainage structure. It's a hardship financially, and nobody is going to use it. Because there is no recreational places on the east side, no shopping on the west side for about 3 miles. And once this 4th edition is done, there will be totally 240 lots. Density of the addition is 2.08. Very nice addition. I'm really proud of the addition to design it. And homeowners have kept it in a good shape. I request to go ahead and not put the sidewalk along Memorial. It is not going to serve any purpose now or any near future. And if you have any question after the other people's represent their case, please, I'll be able to answer some of the questions.
Question from the board members regarding his sidewalk variance request along Memorial Road.
This time, I'd like to hear the protesters, the neighbors that are here to speak on this application.
Mr. Little, are you going to speak on behalf of everyone that signed up, or I don't have a problem if everyone wants to speak that signed up to let them speak, but I don't want, we need to keep the meeting going.
For everybody here.
Okay.
After I speak, you might ask if anybody else has anything else.
Yeah, let's do it that way. But go ahead.
I must be nobody because he said nobody's going to use it, and I've personally taken my bicycle up that area without the sidewalk there. I'd do it a lot more if the sidewalk was there. I've got some things here, if I could show you.
Yeah, give me Kathy.
One per. What I've got drawn on this Google map print is you'll see in black the current sidewalk that goes around about 75% of that section line. You'll also see where there's sidewalk east of there by Cobblestone, where he made mention that there's no sidewalk there. And they also had the same difficulty building the sidewalk over drainage ditch, but they were able to do it. I think for safety, if you'll see in the red, that's the proposed area that he does not want to put a sidewalk. I think for safety, he mentioned that it's a kid-friendly neighborhood. We've got playgrounds, we've got walking paths, we've got a swimming pool, and we've got kids out on bicycles, we've got neighbors out on bicycles, and sometimes you want to get out of the neighborhood, go around the Big Mile section line. We can actually ride a bicycle over to Francis Tuttle, different areas, and I just think that it's against city code. Why would we grant this variance to not put a sidewalk in here and to ruin the continuity of this section line where we have sidewalk going all the way around it? If you'll notice where there is no line drawn, that's undeveloped property, and I'm sure that you'll require that they put a sidewalk in when they develop that. Any questions?
We struggle with this issue, and I think that I can be more compelled to support a sidewalk here where we're surrounding a residential area than I can where we've had conditional use or some time limitations like I have in the past. So, any other questions from the board?
Anybody else wish to speak?
Speak, yeah. One at a time, please. Just if you could queue up, that'd be great.
My name is Mark Wood. I live at 7828 Northwest 130th Terrace. I won't go through and repeat everything Mr. Little said about safety and access and all those things. I just wanted to make the point that we're investing millions of dollars right now in MAPS 3 to build sidewalks and walking paths. It seems crazy to me that we would not have them built where they're already required under ordinance in a neighborhood that actually uses them. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Jeff Walraven at 7612 Northwest 132nd Place. I just wanted to also note I've got 10 other neighbors that have signed to support building the sidewalks or support not granting the variance. Also, Farmers Insurance, one of their headquarters buildings is right down the street. That's one of the sidewalks you see. Got kids 9 and 12, plenty of kids in the neighborhood. And the point is we want to have them there. They can walk to the Votech at some point in the future. As far as no one using them, I don't think that's true. And I wasn't going to bring this up, but since he brought up the amenities and all those type things, there were several amenities that were never put in the neighborhood. So those are moot points. We want the sidewalk built. I can turn this into you guys if you want.
Yes, for purposes of the record, if you could hand that in. Thank you. Ma'am?
My name is Fannie Bates. I live at 943 Northeast 16th Street. I'm a certified special ed teacher. I worked for many years in schools in this area. I think it's necessary for people in wheelchairs. Nobody has mentioned this. There could be students at Francis Tuttle who are in wheelchairs who might want to go for a little stroll in between classes, get out and get some fresh air. And I see no reason why their desire to save money is more important than the ability of people in a wheelchair to be able to move around freely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is John Dalton. I live at 7836 Northwest 133rd Terrace. Just to reiterate the point, I own a real estate development company and mortgage company here in town. Putting this sidewalk in is going to do nothing but increase the value of our neighborhood and our property. Them not putting it in seems like a cheap effort for them to try and save some money. When we moved in, we all agreed to pay what they asked for the lots.
for them to back up on this now seems kind of ridiculous. I also have children in the neighborhood, and for them to be able to use this sidewalk would be a great benefit to my family. Thank you for your time.
My name is Chris Porter, 7629 Northwest 133rd Place. I live in the neighborhood as well. Something that hadn't been mentioned, I think he kind of led to it, was that there is kind of a ditch area. So without that, you're forced to walk either on the street or way up into the grass through trees, all kinds of other issues. So if you were going to try to make movement down Memorial, which is a reasonably high traffic area, especially with all the recent businesses with Paycom, they're expanding, which is bringing more and more traffic down Memorial. Without the sidewalk, you're either walking in a ditch or you're walking on a high traffic road.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I would entertain a motion.
I would,
Hold on, yes, hold on, go ahead. And then we'll have him respond, you're right.
I'm sorry, did you have something you wanted to say?
He may want to respond, that's all I said.
Oh,
The applicant.
I heard from a couple of opponents that is the saving the money. That's not the case. Whatever we spend in here, that is going to be gone when Memorial is improved. The slopes will be different. Right now, there are big dips there, and when they raise it, the sidewalk will, in the relation to the street, sidewalk will be not meeting handicap requirements. And right now, there is nobody using it. I heard that they said that they're bicycling and all that. There is more than a mile of a sidewalk inside. All and above they put in front of their houses. This is on the common areas. So I request that sidewalk should be not required.
Thank you.
well, I mean, you guys know my views on this subject. The idea of there being internal amenities and arterial sidewalks, it's not an either-or thing. The internal amenities are great for the people who live there. The arterial sidewalks are there for people who maybe don't. And nobody ever wants to build sidewalks. They always go nowhere because the city went for 40 years without building any. The point is, as property develops, these need to be included and installed. And if the city rips them out later, I guess the city will pay to replace them. But I think I'm going to move to deny the application.
I will second that.
We have a motion to deny the application on the table. All in favor? Motion is denied.
Call it.
Okay. Kathy?
Item number 8, case number 13861, appeal of Preservation Oklahoma of the decision of the Downtown Design Review Committee regarding the approval of the demolition of the Stage Center building located at 400 West Sheridan Avenue.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is David Box, and what you are about to hear is the hearing before the DDRC. It's going to be about an hour and a half long. What you're getting handed out right now is a packet that the members of the DDRC looked at while they were considering the case. It is nothing more than the application we filed, but the hearing from the DDRC was filmed with the camera back there.
Mr. Box?
Yes.
I know you have a couple of things that we need to expedite, and then I know that I want to lay a little bit of background before you get into that for the committee.
Okay.
This is here on the record, so we will need to take into account all the evidence that was admitted below with no new evidence. You've all been provided a memorandum from the municipal counselor regarding the decision, the factors before us. I would also ask, while the video is playing, if anybody has not requested a slip to speak with the clerk right up here in the front, if they would do so. There are a lot of people out there. I would also think that what you say before us needs to be done in a succinct manner so I can accommodate everything. And it also, if somebody has said something that you wish to amplify the same point, you may just want to rely on then. So that, and I know you have a time constraint.
Yeah.
with some-
The only reason I handed that out now is the camera used for the DDRC hearings, the one in back, and so there will be many references to tabs, and that's what they had in front of them. The reason I came up to the podium now is Mr. Larry Nichols of Devon Energy Corporation is here. He wishes to speak on this item, but he has a time constraint. He is introducing Judge Kenneth Starr, who is speaking at a federal bar convention, and so if the board would allow, he wishes to speak now, so he can leave before the hour and a half starts.
That'd be fine. Mr. Nichols?
Thank you. Larry Nichols, Executive Chairman of Devon Energy, 333 West Sheridan. I thank you very much for allowing me to speak on behalf of Devon about our neighbor, the Stage Center. Devon has been committed for many years to preserving buildings in our neighborhood and our city that are buildings that we can fix their problems with and help create buildings that serve a useful purpose. And I'll give you two quick examples. One is the Concord Hotel, a very interesting building. It was built in 1910. At the time it was built, it had all the modern conveniences. It advertised that it had electricity and plumbing on every floor, all 10 floors. 10,000 people gathered around that building in 1910 to see the marvel of that building. When we bought it several years ago, we saw a 98-year-old architectural gem, and yet a building that had significant problems, but problems that we could fix and make that building a building that would survive and continue to be used by people. Good bones, but serious problems. We spent serious money fixing the foundation, waterproofing the foundation, putting in new electricity, new plumbing, new features like that. We took out some old, not original, very unpleasant lights, put in new LED lights that would put light on the very interesting terracotta features at the top of that building. And we now have a 103-year-old building that is a building that's good for another 100 years. It's a building that people can use. It's a great hotel. It has this #2 restaurant in town. And we were able to fix those problems and let people enjoy both a functioning building as well as a building that they can appreciate the historical and the architectural significance of that building. A second example, the Overholser Mansion here in Heritage Hills. When it had problems with the roof and was getting damaged, Devon stepped forward and was the largest and first corporation to make any donation to help fix the mechanical problems in that building. A building that's a great museum for all of us to go and see a building in the 1910s and 20s and the furniture and the clothing that was used in that period. In the Stage Center, we have an entirely different situation. When we started our building, I really focused on conversations that were going on about that building and what we needed to do to fix it. We sent our architects and our builders over there to look at that building, to give us some real-time information on what was the condition of that building. They came back quite shocked. The two stages there are propped up by 2x4s. If you walked on those, the 2x4s have been added to keep the stage from falling in. It is a dilapidated building. They guess it would cost around $20 million to fix that building. So we asked the logical question, if someone were to spend $20 million on that building, who would use it? You don't spend money unless you know at the end of the deal, particularly serious money like $20 million, who is going to use it? The Community Foundation hired an out-of-sight, objective, neutral person to come in and look at all of the theaters, all of the organizations throughout central Oklahoma to see if someone renovated it, would they use it? They went from OU to OSU, anywhere in central Oklahoma, talked to a long list of people, were unable to find anyone who would show up and use that building if it were built. The Community Foundation then advertised, opened it up to anybody, talked to the architects, talked to anybody who might use that building for any purpose. They found no one. It was a public process. Anyone could participate in it. The reality is that no one is going to spend $20 million to fix a building that has no use once it's finished. The architects have not shown up for that purpose. The people who make emotional pleas and have emotional attachment have not shown up to raise any money to fix it. No one has. And we have had years and years for them to step forward and find a use. No one has been able to solve the problem. The sad but harsh reality is the Stage Center has become a blighted building. It is a building that is dangerous for people to walk in today. It is a building that stands in the way of the Renaissance, the continued growth and development in the western part of Oklahoma City, a place where OG&E is poised and has the financial capability to build a high-class building that can be used by people and can enhance the development of Oklahoma City. It's sad, but it's true. It's time for the Stage Center to come down. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And at this time, we'll watch the video. Okay. So we'll play the video.
There are no continuance requests. There are no items on the consent docket. And we're going into the cases for individual consideration, and I will recuse myself for this first case. Gigi? Thank you. We'll get started. First, we will have the applicant come up to the podium. If you would, please tell us who you are and make your presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is David Box, 522 Colcord Drive, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant. I have several people with me here today that I'd like to introduce. I have Brad Ezel with Leidos. Leidos is formerly Benham. This group will know things they've worked on, such as the Chesapeake Arena and the Will Rogers Terminal. Also here is Nancy Anthony, president of the Oklahoma City Community Foundation, and she will be able to speak to facts and circumstances relating to the RFP that was previously issued on this site. Mr. Paul Renfro, Vice President of OG&E, is with us. Mr. Brian Alford, Managing Director of Public Affairs at OG&E. Mr. Bill Bullard, General Counsel of OG&E. Mr. Scott Dedman, who's an architect at ADG. And finally, Mr. Peter DeLisi, Executive Director of the Arts Council. He'll be here to address this committee on issues surrounding the Arts Council's operation of the building. So why we are here today is because we have a unique opportunity. The city has a unique opportunity to see this site at 400 West Sheridan redeveloped for a corporate headquarters. Now, the procedural function as to why we're here is for a demolition permit. We're requesting this committee grant us a certificate of approval to demolish the structure at 400 West Sheridan, and in addition, the accessory structures. And what we have at 400 West Sheridan is a unique building, but it's a unique building that over the last few years has fallen into disrepair. It's in a state of ongoing decay, it is uninhabitable, and it has become a big problem and a blight on downtown. This building, as it currently sits, is arresting development in this part of downtown. It's arresting development on what we think is a key piece of property in downtown Oklahoma City. And we think that the CA before this committee will allow not just a great opportunity, but a unique opportunity. It's not every day and it's not every year that this city and this committee gets an opportunity to vote on a case that will allow a corporate headquarters.
We're experiencing a bit of technical difficulty. If you could please bear with us.
I broke it. Like that bad? It just... Yeah.
Give us just a few moments. We'll restart the video. We're having a little bit of technical difficulty.
It doesn't start pretty soon, can we just testify? We're just as important as Larry Nichols. You know, we pay taxes.
I understand that. That'll be a question for the municipal council when he comes back in the room. I do want to keep things moving. Thank you. Ma'am, do you have a scheduling problem? If that's the issue, we'll be more than happy to address you just like we did Mr. Nichols if you have some. Okay, we'll come forward then.
My name is Fanny Bates. I live at 943 Northeast 16th Street. I am a certified teacher, and I'm scheduled to teach Reader's Theater at Ralph Ellison Library, so that's why I have a schedule.
We're more than happy to accommodate your request. Thank you for letting us know.
As I'm sure you know, for many years, the tax dollars that we Oklahoma City residents spend has gone mainly to special interests and business interests and not to the people that pay the taxes. Our teenagers and children are in a world of hurt in Oklahoma City because nobody is paying attention to their needs. I've been asking for years for us to have a free educational center downtown for all children, school children who are residents of Oklahoma City, where they can go after school 7 days a week and get help with their lessons. And I've been ignored for years. I'm 64 years old. I'm getting ready to volunteer. If you would turn this into an educational center, I will volunteer there for the rest of my life, 8 hours a day, and I won't charge you a dime. And a lot of other retired teachers will also volunteer. I think the school systems would cooperate. We would have educational games only, no fun games, research assistant, reader's theater for the children. We don't need another skyscraper in Oklahoma City. Our children need help, and this is your chance to give it to them. I'm asking you to give us 30 days to put together a plan to get all the school districts in Oklahoma City to come together and come up with a plan to get this money and renovate this beautiful piece of art and make it into an educational center that the whole country will admire.
Thank you. Where do we stand on the video? Okay.
of Public Affairs at OG&E, Mr. Bill Bullard, General Counsel of OG&E, Mr. Scott Dedman, who's an architect at ADG, and finally, Mr. Peter DeLisi, Executive Director of the Arts Council. He will be here to address this committee on issues surrounding the Arts Council's operation of the building. So why we are here today is because we have a unique opportunity. The city has a unique opportunity to see this site at 400 West Sheridan redeveloped for a corporate headquarters. Now, the procedural function as to why we're here is for a demolition permit. We're requesting this committee grant us a certificate of approval to demolish the structure at 400 West Sheridan, and in addition, the accessory structures. Now, what we have at 400 West Sheridan is a unique building, but it's a unique building that over the last few years has fallen into disrepair. It's in a state of ongoing decay, it is uninhabitable, and it has become a big problem and a blight on downtown. This building, as it currently sits, is arresting development in this part of downtown. It's arresting development on what we think is a key piece of property in downtown Oklahoma City. And we think that the CA before this committee will allow not just a great opportunity, but a unique opportunity. It's not every day and it's not every year that this city and this committee gets an opportunity to vote on a case that will allow a corporate headquarters to relocate in an area that is thriving. We feel that what is before this committee is something that is appropriate. We think it is the most reasonable request that could be made on this piece of property. But I think it's important to walk this committee through what's transpired over years, to understand that it's not this applicant that's coming before the committee seeking to tear down a building for the sake of tearing down a building. What you will see through the course of years and studies is that this building, through events completely unrelated to my client, has become in a state of disrepair, has become in a state of ongoing decay, and has become a blight. Now, what you have before you is a packet, and throughout my presentation I'm going to refer to various things, and it's tabbed for your convenience. So I think it's important to start with a study in 2003 that you will find at tab 8 in your packet. The 2003 Schuler and Shook study was done in cooperation with Web Management Services. And the purpose of this study was to evaluate the condition of the physical plan of Stage Center, to develop a menu of renovation options, and develop associated preliminary cost options for possible renovations. Now, this study was commenced by the Arts Council of Oklahoma City. And the conclusion that this study came to was, in 2003, they estimated to bring the building just up to the ability to make it functional, you were looking at $5 to $7 million. But the problem with the $5 to $7 million is that didn't put the building into a position of being functional, because the survey they conducted found that the users for these types of small performing arts centers required certain amenities that Stage Center lacked. So the $5 to $7 million wouldn't put the building in a position that could even be functional. They estimated in 2003 that it would require $11 to $18 million to turn the building around and to construct the necessary support facilities. As we move forward to 2010, there was a significant rain event in this city. That significant rain event had a major impact on this facility. It flooded. And what happened when it flooded is it wreaked havoc on the electrical system, the mechanical systems, and created a situation in which mold began to grow and thrive. Seeing that the opportunities for the building were becoming diminished, in 2011, a study was conducted by Webb. And if you'll turn to tab 9, you will see the Webb study. It's important to understand who Webb is. Webb is North America's leading provider of development, planning, and consulting services for arts and creative entities. I think that is critical to understanding this report. This is a group that seeks to find solutions for these types of buildings. They don't seek to find reasons to demolish. They want to keep these types of buildings. This study they were hired by the Cultural Development Corporation of Oklahoma City in cooperation with Allied Arts. Now, their task was to consider the feasibility of renovating and reanimating Stage Center. So the process they went through was thorough, and it's important that I read what they did. What they did was interview more than 70 community leaders. They tested demand and evaluated current supply of other cultural facilities. They analyzed market data and researched comparable facilities and projects in other parts of the country. So as you can see, this wasn't a study that was predetermined. They took a lot of time and effort to come up with what they could find to reimagine and reanimate this building. But notably, if you go to page 23, you'll find the conclusions of this study. And what they found was a need does exist for this type of facility. But similar to the 2003 study, what it found is this center does not have adequate support facilities that the types of groups that operate this type of facility not only need but demand. And so I quote, "We are fundamentally, we are not optimistic about the idea of renovating Stage Center as a multi-user arts center. This is due in part to what they deemed a technical unsuitability of the building. None of the spaces in Stage Center in its current configuration with its existing amenities meet the needs of these groups." So what this study did was come to a conclusion. and it was two-part. They recommended, one, put the building out for a public RFP. See what responses you get. Once the RFP process is done, evaluate the responses, and if no viable candidates emerge from the RFP process, then the appropriate thing to do is to put the building for sale and allow the market to dictate what the appropriate use is for this site. So as we fast forward, in 2012, the RFP was produced. You can find that on tab 10 in your book. The RFP sought rehabilitation as a theater or other economically viable use or mix of uses. So it was a fairly broad RFP. It was seeking anything to tell us how we can make this facility work and function. The RFP only had two responses. One was for a children's museum, one was for an architectural museum. And notably, neither of the responses lacked viable funding. So, with that in mind, based on the 2011 study and based on the lack of viable candidates from the RFP, they did what they had to do, and that is put the building up for sale, allow the market to dictate what the appropriate use for this site is. Then we fast forward to July 22nd, 2013. The applicant bought the property. After purchasing the property, he then commissioned a study. You can find that study at tab 11 in your binder. This is the Lido study.
David, who is maintaining the facility? Who is paying for the maintenance of the facility during this period of time?
It changed. As of now, the applicant owns it. There was a time in
Prior to that?
Prior to that, the city owned it, I believe, until 2011, and then it reverted back to the Kirkpatrick Foundation. When we look at the Lido study, what it says is, at this point, based on the damage over years of problems and now with the flooding, we are looking at in excess of $10 million just to turn the building on. Now, that doesn't address the functionality of the building. So, $10 million just to rehab the building to be able to open your doors. And then we have to go back to what the previous study said. In 2003 dollars, we were looking at somewhere between 11 and 18 million. So now we're looking at somewhere around 30 million to make this building functional and open the door. And that fails to address what it would cost on an ongoing basis for operations. And it fails to address the fact that we don't have a user for the building, we don't have a mix of uses for the building, and we don't have an ability to repurpose the building. We respectfully ask this committee for approval of our CA. We think that based on not just our desire to repurpose this building, but years and years of studies and attempts to make this building work, that the request before you today is not only the most appropriate course of action on this site, but it's a course of action that will continue the development of downtown. It will allow a key piece of property in the downtown area to be repurposed with an amazing opportunity. It is not every day that a great corporate citizen comes before any body with a proposal to relocate their corporate headquarters. And that's what this committee has before it today. I do think it's important that we show you what our vision for this site is, and that vision is found within your tabs. It's going to be within your report, but Mr. Dedman with ADG is going to get up and go through the renderings. If there's no questions of me at this point, I will turn the podium over to Mr. Dedman.
Does the committee have any questions? At this point, we're ready to move on. Thank you.
Good morning. Scott Dedman with ADG, 116 East Sheridan, Oklahoma City. Our firm was asked to explore what the development possibilities would be on this site, really based on the user's needs and the user's programs and how that would develop into the site. And so that's what we have done. Some of the sort of planning considerations and recommendations we've made, things that we've felt are important, would be to be able to create a building that creates street walls and encourages active sidewalks, creates and really protected human-scale pedestrian areas around the building so that it really promotes some public interaction into the building. provide spaces at the ground level for uses of retail, commercial, restaurant-type spaces. And again, that just continues to promote the public interaction. One of the things that's particularly important on this site is that we want to be able to provide enough parking on this site. We know that downtown parking is a big issue right now, so we want to provide enough parking on this site to accommodate the users and the tenants of this building. And so minimizing the impact of that parking structure is an important planning issue that we have to look at. And then really developing an overall composition of the development and how that relates to the adjacent blocks and the adjacent neighbors is an important thing that we wanted to look at. There are some traditional uses in this area, the Arts Festival being one, and so paying respect to the Festival Plaza is very important, and how we can help to do that. And then also the Myriad Gardens is a great amenity to Oklahoma City, and how can we strengthen that tie and that relationship to Myriad Gardens. So up on the screen are some of our drawings and sketches. And again, these are not a final design. These are a planning study, a master plan study for this site. The images that you will see are images that really relate more to the massing in relationship to the program elements as opposed to an actual design. So please keep that in mind as we go through these. So the plan that you see on your screen right now is the ground floor plan, and I think that is really one of the key areas in how that relates to the city and to the street. Again, one of the things that we felt was important was to create street walls around the entire complex. Thank you, Scotty. So that we've brought the building to the property line along Sheridan, and this is proposed to be possibly a future development in this area of the hotel office residential tower. Again, with some opportunities for restaurant space, possibly opportunities for a coffee shop, something that would relate to a hotel lobby that would open to the street. Again, the street wall would continue in this area with the office floor above extending to the property line, and then actually recessing the first floor a little bit so that we have some protected pedestrian space, and really brings that pedestrian space down to a human scale and connects that. The other things that we felt were important were creating some active outdoor spaces, some openings. And so slightly recessing the lobby and creating an outdoor plaza that could provide some outdoor dining space at that corner. This is a very important corner, being across from the gardens, being across from Devon, and any other future development that happens in downtown. This is, we feel like this is a very key corner. Of course, this is the Hudson and Sheridan corner. And then as we move around, the relationship to Myriad Gardens, we think that needs to be enhanced and strengthened as a part of this. Again, the building is somewhat set back from that corner so that it opens up this area and really welcomes people to the Festival Plaza. Again, there would be a second lobby, possibly for additional tenants in the building. Possible location for some office space that would open off of Festival Plaza. We see some uses for that. We're also looking at the possibility of providing space for a daycare. We think this would be a unique location for daycare, being directly across from John Rex School. So we think that would be a very nice amenity to have for the city. The other thing that happens is the building would actually extend to this dashed line that we see. We'd be able to recess a protected play area for the kids and to be able to secure that. Part of the development would also be to build a permanent stage as a part of Festival Plaza. So that's what we see right here. We've incorporated that into the service access for the building in this sketch. Again, this is not the final design, but this is one possible strategy that could take place where we could berm up and create a down ramp that would be the backdrop for the stage in this area. One of the key things along Walker Avenue is we've tried to keep the exposure of the parking garage to a minimum, really anchoring the corners with the daycare and with the possibility of a retail, restaurant, cafe type space on the corners, so that we have a limited amount of exposure of the parking garage. Let me see. One thing I did want to mention, our property line is actually right down the center of Festival Plaza. And as you can see, we've set quite a ways back. Actually, the line of the building is in the current line of kind of the edge of Festival Plaza before it goes onto the site. So it basically aligns with the original property line where the street right-of-way was. Again, I think the importance of this first floor is really looking at ways that we can create this interaction with the public and with the pedestrians, and that's will be an important factor. Then at the fourth level, we are suggesting that that the parking area be capped with a green roof. Green roof does several things. It provides some nice amenity space for future tenants, for the primary tenant that would be going in the tower. The conference center would be located at this level as well, so the green roof really creates a nice amenity space for this conference center area. The other thing that the green roof does is it really hides and screens the parking from above, so that as the buildings are looking down, not only this building but other buildings in downtown, as they look down, they don't just see another sea of parking, another sea of cars outside of this space. The other thing I'll point out too is not only is there a green roof over the parking, but there's a green roof over the podium area. That'll become a little clearer when you see the renderings. But that provides some breakout space for the conference center area, so that there is actually an outdoor roof space that could be used by locating the conference center on that level. The next image is a cross section. This is a section that's looking north, and so you can see the cut through the parking garage. What we're proposing is that 2 levels of parking be located below grade. The site is already excavated quite a ways, and so there'd be some some benefit to that excavation to be able to go ahead and bring 2 levels of parking below grade. That would leave us 4 levels above grade, and we feel like we can get enough parking in that location to serve the building and the future tenants of that space. Then again, of course, on top of the parking is the green roof. As we look along Hudson Avenue, we would actually have 2 levels of parking below the main tower. At the ground level would be the lobby, restaurants, retail, commercial space. We'd propose a higher floor-to-floor height in that area so that we would have some nice space for retail and commercial uses. Above that would be 2 levels of offices, and then again the conference center would sit at the green roof level. And then the main tower would sit above the conference center. And so again, these are images. We're looking primarily at massing here and how the pieces fit on the site. We feel the main tower would need to address the park, and also really the massing of downtown starts in the core, of course around Devon Tower now, and scales down as we get back. And of course this is the John Rex Elementary School now, and so we want to respect the height of that and not overwhelm that project. This is a nice view of the potential green roof and the way that could look. Also the development of Festival Plaza and how that could become a very active space from a day-to-day standpoint, because we would have a tremendous amount of people using this building and being able to utilize that outdoor space again. And being able to link that with Myriad Gardens, I think, would be a very important thing to do. Another view, this is looking really from Myriad Gardens basically back toward the tower, a little bit of an aerial view. It shows well sort of how we've set the building back to create some outdoor plaza space at the entries to the building, possibly a video screen or some type of active element might take place there that could be used for the Dead Center Film Festival or just things that promote Oklahoma City in that area. Again, this is the potential office space in this location. Could as easily or just as well be a restaurant possibly that opens onto Festival Plaza that would bring people into that area. The sort of the recess for the outdoor play area or the daycare is shown in that as well. And again, this just gives you a good idea of the massing of the tower and also the level of the conference center. And now you can really get a view of the roof deck off of the conference center. Again, just looking down at the building, again, you see the roof deck, the future development in this area. Again, we've said that that's somewhere between an 8 and 12-story structure. I think we've got it shown at approximately 10 right now, just to give you an idea of the scale and the massing. And then this would be a view from the corner of Sheridan and Hudson, looking from the Devon headquarters corner, looking back, just to give you an idea of the massing and the height and the way it relates to the street. This was what I was talking about as far as providing some protected pedestrian space by pushing that front back a little bit. We have a more human scale at the retail, restaurant, commercial area, and create walkways that could be very, very pleasant to use. That is the sort of the study that we've done. I think it has some really great possibilities. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Dedman?
Yeah. Scott, are you actually going to reconstruct the Festival Plaza all the way, or just...
Well, certainly a portion of it is going to be disrupted because let's see if I can go back here. The property line is right in the center, and of course we're proposing that be used for an underground ramp that would lead to the service area for the building. So a good portion of the Festival Plaza will have to be renovated. To what extent the rest of it would have to be repaired and renovated, I think that's yet to be determined. But certainly there will be some construction that takes place there.
I think it's important now that you've seen the opportunity for this site. If you'll turn to tab 6 in your handout, these are a list of items that the applicant is committed to, and that when a building permit is filed, these are the standards that will have to apply. 1, a 14 to 16-story office tower along Hudson Avenue, which will include the headquarters of OGE Energy Corporation. 2, the site for an 8 to 12-story tower along Sheridan Avenue to be made available for hotel, residential, and/or office development to be offered for sale and developments by others. 3, integrated multi-level parking. Number 4, lease space for retail, restaurants, and other uses benefiting downtown. 5, an exhibit commemorating the architectural significance of Stage Center. And 6, areas and improvements accommodating the Spring Festival of the Arts sponsored by the Arts Council of Oklahoma City. And with that, I would ask Mr. DeLisi to come up and address this committee.
My name is Peter DeLisi, 400 West California Street. I'm the Executive Director of the Arts Council of Oklahoma City, and a past user of the building. First, I want to mention that the building was never owned by the city of Oklahoma City. It was owned by the Kirkpatrick Affiliated Fund under the Community Foundation. They offered us the opportunity several years ago to use the building, so we became the owner of the building for a while, but they still retained ownership of the land. And we were able to be the owners of the building as long as we used the building for arts-related purposes. And of course, when we had the flood, there was nothing we could do at that point. And so we turned the building back over to the Kirkpatrick Affiliated Fund. As a user of the building, Stage Center was problematic That's really an understatement. From day one, the costs associated with that building almost buried every other user that had used the building, going all the way back to the Mummers Theater when it first opened in the late 60s, early 70s. We felt like it was incumbent upon us to try to make a run with this building, to try to do our best to, because of its significance as an arts facility. And it was just always very, very difficult. You couldn't plan for anything. For instance, if a chiller were to go out in that building, the cost of it would be $100,000. And you wouldn't know when something like that was going to happen. So you couldn't budget for it. You just really had a hard time budgeting for things that had to do with the upkeep of the building. Just the general maintenance of it, it was just a terrible headache. It's been vacant now for several years. And of course, as Mr. Box has pointed out, it has really become a blight in the area. It's also, I think, kind of dangerous. People sleeping on the deck, and it's just unfortunate that it's gone downhill so much. But everything that could possibly be done to try to figure out how to make this building work, believe me, has been done. Many of us have worked on all those studies that were discussed, not just the Arts Council of Oklahoma City, but several other arts-related organizations that were involved with Allied Arts Study. Painstakingly went through every aspect of how that building could be utilized, and it's just very unfortunate that it really doesn't work. And so I'm just telling you that we were able to take the funds that we the considerable funds that we were putting into that building and refocus those monies to projects that are going on now that are just really meeting the needs of a lot of different artists and performers in Oklahoma City. You can imagine what you can do with $100,000 when you're a nonprofit agency and you're trying to squeak every penny out of those hard-earned dollars that people are giving to us. And we feel like that's the best thing for us to be doing at this point. We'd love for you to go and visit our website and see some of the wonderful projects that we do. Our mission is to bring the arts and the community together, and we try to do that every single day of the week with the projects that we put on. And we love what we do, and we really love being a part of downtown Oklahoma City. I would say the idea of having something go on to this property, someone to come in and spend the kind of dollars and effort that Mr. Williams and his crew are putting together is very exciting to me. It'll be really nice if something like that could happen there, just the prospects of getting this property up to speed.
Peter, when was the last event there?
The last event?
Yeah.
Well, I would say it would be it was the Arts Festival here right before the flood. The flood happened in like June.
Theater-wise, when you had a production.
Oh, well, Carpenter Square Theater was one of the tenants of that building. And then, of course, now remember when the flood occurred, I think at the time there were 4 people that were using the facility, including Oklahoma Shakespeare in the Park and Carpenter Square Theater. Well, unfortunately for Oklahoma Shakespeare in the Park, their offices were in the basement of the building. The basement of the building was completely and totally flooded. And then, of course, the sub-basement, as Mr. Box alluded to, is where all the electrical things were, and that was a room that was even lower than the basement, which was completely underwater. So Shakespeare in the Park lost literally everything. They had, perma boxes full of their records for years that were just underwater and lost. Carpenter Square Theater had all of their staging equipment and costumes for every production that they'd ever put on in the history of the organization were down in that basement, and they lost almost all of that. So it was a tragic loss to the community when that happened.
All those events were they ever profitable, or everything had to be subsidized?
Everything had to be subsidized.
From day one?
At one point, we were subsidizing for a Carpenter Square Theater performance, or for any theater performance, per seat, $8 per seat per performance. If that gives you any idea. They had a full season. It was dramatic. I believe at one point was the Civic Center numbers, I think subsidies were more in the neighborhood of $2 per seat per performance. So it was just outrageous in that regard. I'm sorry? No, and it was never perfect, in my opinion. I mean, from an environmental standpoint, it was built back in a time when they really didn't think about eco-friendly building practices. There's large single-pane windows that if it's hot outside, it's hot inside. If it's cold outside, it's a meat locker inside. In some parts of the building, there's a litany of reasons why it was difficult that I could go into if you want to have lunch sometime. Any other questions for me? Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That leads us to where we are and where we are now on this property. And the way we see it is that we are now at a crossroads in this city for this piece of property. We have a structure that has, by all accounts, had every effort made by a litany of groups to try to make this work, and it just doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, it becomes a major problem and a blight on downtown. And what that is doing is frustrating future development, but it's frustrating a unique and rare future development, an opportunity that doesn't present itself often. We believe that the CA before this committee that we're seeking approval for is the most appropriate course of action, it's the most reasonable course of action, and it's the only way to ensure that this future development and this opportunity is seized. We respectfully ask this committee to grant approval of our CA. I'm here to answer any questions.
You guys made a great presentation. Tell me about the timeline on this project, from demo to construction start to finish. Kind of, how do you see that happen?
Rainey Williams, 5400 North Grand Boulevard. Timeline, of course, we talked about. We have a massing study. We've not done final design work, obviously, for a building of this magnitude. We're looking at somewhere between $2 and $4 million to do final design work. So we're not doing that yet, obviously, pending approval of our plans. If we're granted that approval, then it will take probably, we estimate a year, maybe 18 months to do studies for OG&E's needs, do final drawings, and during that process we'll embark on demolition and obviously getting approval from this board. But we're thinking that it could be in the mid-2015 range to start construction, and a 18 to 24 month construction period thereafter.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very much. Is that the conclusion of your presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay. Pardon me. Would you like to give us your staff response, please?
Yes, I can, unless you want to ask the audience first. It's up to you.
Okay. No, go ahead, would you please?
We have not had an application for this new building, so we have not considered it. A lot of the information that you're hearing today is new to us also. So we don't have an application for this proposal, and our ordinance asks that we judge whether or not a building should be demolished based on its historic relevance. This building is unique. It is historic to the history of Oklahoma City. It's designed by a notable architect. It's been recognized nationwide, statewide, and it forms part of the history of Oklahoma City. And based on those criteria from our guidelines, staff recommends denial of this proposal for demolition of this building.
Thank you.
Madam Chairperson, if I may, I think it's important I address a point real quick. what the committee saw from us in the packet is exactly what we filed with planning staff on December 17th. So they have had an opportunity to see everything that this committee saw.
Scotty, is it on the historic register?
It is eligible to be listed on the historic register. It has not been so listed because the owner declined to allow that.
But it's not on the historic register?
No. It has been deemed eligible by the Historic Society. No.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any other questions of Scotty? Okay. Just for the record, I do want you all to know, and want the audience here to know, that in our packets, thank you, Mr. Box, for the binder very neatly put together that you gave us, but in our packets, we did have your application. We did have all this information, including the Leidos study, the Schuler and Shook study, the Webb study, the inspection reports, and also the RFPs that were put out. And so we did have all of this documentation to look at before we gathered here today. So many pages, many pages. So we're going to move forward, and we do have several people here, I think, that would like to speak about this project. If there are representatives of any groups that are here, if you would like to come first to the podium, announce your name, please sign in and speak. If you can keep your comments to just a few minutes, we would really appreciate that, so that everyone that's here has a chance to comment. And we also have received all the comments from the public that have been presented to the staff, and we've had those to review as well. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Barrett Williamson. I'm currently the president of Preservation Oklahoma Incorporated, a statewide preservation organization. I also serve as an advisor for the state of Oklahoma to the National Trust for Historic Places. Today marks a solemn occasion. This is about the future of historic preservation in Oklahoma City. You will be deciding the fate of one of the 20th century's most important and significant buildings today. This application is to demolish a structure. That is all. You've heard the saying, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. Well, this pig has a ton of lipstick on it. Is the building important? The building is so important that architectural historians and writers have been discussing it since it was built over 40 years ago. Names like Kevin Roche, Frank Gehry, and others have cited its influence on modern architectural thought. Is this building important? The Oklahoma City Historic Preservation Commission thinks so. The National Trust for Historic Places thinks so. Statewide organizations think so, including the American Institute of Architects, local chapter, the Tulsa Foundation for Architecture, the Oklahoma City Foundation for Architecture, and many others. Next slide, please. Okay. So, your decision today requires you to follow a fairly simple set of guidelines. And again, I'd like to say, this is excerpted here on the screen, that the decisions will be based on the guidelines and regulations of the Downtown Design District Ordinance. Also excerpted is the Downtown Design Review Committee staff shall apply these guidelines, which I believe that they have done correctly, and that it's very important in following these guidelines to preserve our historic character-defining features that make Oklahoma City unique and not generica. So, this is a summary of the organizations that think that this is important, and there's some others that I believe that I haven't even mentioned. There's a School of Design, many others, but in bringing these groups to the forefront, it is a rare day when preservationists and architects agree on anything. So we are all unanimous in our agreement that the Stage Center is an important building. We put out a petition on change.org, which I believe you have a copy of, that was on the due date of the delivery, December 18th. We put this petition up. As of this morning, we were 40 signatures shy of 1,000. We've had people sign this from 35 states and 8 countries. The majority of the signatures are Oklahomans. The ordinance does not speak in any way to economic feasibility. More lipstick. Many of our preservation and civic success stories have come to be because of a little patience. Here are 3 of them. They all sat vacant for much longer than the 3 to 4 years that Stage Center has been vacant, and they're all wonderful success stories. In addition, through visionary leadership and the MAPS projects that have come to pass, preservation has been a very important key in the development of Bricktown, all the tax credit work that was done on the canal side of buildings. So if it weren't for preservation and this visionary leadership, we wouldn't have Bricktown. We wouldn't have a rehabilitated Civic Center Music Hall. We wouldn't have a number of other buildings. Oklahoma City is not starved for available land for development. There's so much land available, it's almost a joke. And I'd like to quote a blogger who posted something on the OKC Talk website this last week, and I quote, "It's ridiculous how everyone is obsessing over the need to redevelop this it's ridiculous how everyone is obsessed over the need to redevelop or empty this space right the hell now. Like it is somehow holding back progress in downtown. When smoking holes, parking lots, and other available development sites litter all of downtown. If that building stood as is, it would be another decade at least before we ran out of other options for office development in the central business district. Oh, and then you have the Court of Shoreland, acres and acres of it to consider. A shortage of development options is the opposite of Oklahoma City's problem right now," end quote. Here's another aspect of the ordinance to consider. In the ordinance, it says that historic circulation patterns will be preserved. Demolition of Stage Center will disrupt the pattern that has been established over the years with the Festival of the Arts. Here's a graphic from 2008 when the Court of Shore was beginning and the study that TAP Architecture and their consultants produced leading up to today's efforts. You might notice in that there is no suggestion that Stage Center, which is located right here, be removed. Is there any chance that the new John Rex Elementary School was cited because of its proximity to Stage Center and the Myriad Gardens? It makes a pretty compelling link. You only have one chance to get this right, and there's no guarantees. You're going to have a chance to review the excellent work of ADG and Kestrel, Mr. Williams, coming up in the future under a separate application for certificate of appropriateness. Now is not the time to review that. More lipstick. To reiterate what it states in the ordinance, is that you're reviewing this for demolition and demolition of historically, internationally acclaimed properties is not to be considered. So, I would like to urge you to follow the ordinance, apply the guidelines and regulations as they are written. Don't anticipate future Board of Adjustment action. I think that's out of DDRC's purview. Deal with the fact at hand and deny the applicant. Your package should have been about 1/4 of an inch thick, and that's the thickness of the National Register nomination, which is being held by the keeper of the register. Mr. Williams, if he so chose, could call up the keeper of the register and say, I want the building listed. It would be listed within 24 hours. I mean, it's a slam dunk. There's no dispute. The rest of the material, in my opinion, is just lipstick. As a middle ground, which I do not personally believe in, but I think it's worth saying, if you so choose to, in my opinion, exceed your authority and grant this application, I would urge you to make it contingent upon proof of financing and an approved building permit, so that due to economic factors beyond anybody's control, that we don't end up with a vacant, raw piece of land sitting next to the Devon Center and Myriad Gardens for the next 3 to 5 years. And in doing that, we would still lose an irreplaceable piece of our history. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And for your information, we also did have included in our packet all the historic register documents. Reviewed those.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello.
Please state your name. Hi.
I'm Bob Ross. I'm wearing 2 hats today. I'm the CEO of Inasmuch Foundation, and I'm also on the board of directors on the John Rex Elementary. Inasmuch is at 210 Park Avenue, and Rex Elementary is 500 West Sheridan. Inasmuch Foundation and Ethics and Excellence and Journalism Foundation, the 2 foundations we run that were started by Edith Kinney Gaylord, are the largest private foundations in Oklahoma City. And I thought it was important to note that we are extremely committed to historic preservation of the foundations. In fact, we've provided in excess of $10 million over the past 10 years to various projects in our community, including the renaissance of 16th Street, where the Lyric Theater is located, OCU Law School, the Heritage Center, the History Center. We've provided grants to the Bonwood Memorial. In fact, just gave a large $3.5 million grant for the memorial's expansion. John Rex Elementary is going to open this August. We're very excited. And as you all know, it's right next door to the Stage Center and the planned OG&E headquarters. The school is being built for 500 students, pre-K through 5th grade, and we're going to start pre-K, K1 and 2, and then grow a grade a year from there. Inasmuch Foundation has provided the startup funds for the school, totaling $1 million, and the building is the last structure being built for Maps for Kids, and so it's a very exciting project for downtown. I would like to address some concerns as a neighbor and as a board member of the Rex Elementary. We have, I want to note our safety concerns for the current structure at Stage Center. I personally have walked around, driven around the facility, and noted just 2 weeks ago there is a small homeless camp in various parts of Stage Center, down the ramp that flooded through the garage door. There are several, there's evidence of people living down there. There's also evidence of people living in various kind of nooks and crannies of the building. I noted in Steve Lackmeyer's piece in the Oklahoman 2 days ago, his listing of the various crime and safety statistics. In 2010, a dead body was removed from the site. He noted burglaries, thefts, disturbances, mental health calls. This is not something we want next door to our John Rex Elementary. These safety concerns are real, and they are a major cause of concern for us. I also want to step back and just reflect on the history for the past 3 or 4 years. The Oklahoma City Community Foundation requested proposals for this site. In fact, at Inasmuch Foundation, I fielded phone calls and emails. There was not a not-for-profit theater group, in my understanding, that came forward that exists that can afford to renovate and maintain this building. The only other idea I heard was a children's museum. And there is no startup nonprofit that could afford this liability, both to buy the property, renovate it, and maintain it. At Inasmuch Foundation, this is something that we would not be able to fund if requested. We are thrilled with the notion that OG&E would build its headquarters right next to our John Rex Elementary. Obviously, OG&E is one of the finest companies in the state and indeed the country. Its company is committed to Oklahoma City. Its employees are committed to the city and downtown. We're excited at the Rex Elementary for the possibility of volunteers, mentors, and a real exciting partnership. When you boil this down, in my opinion, the risk of Stage Center sitting empty is too great. If not OG&E, what? And I urge this committee to approve the application so that OG&E can be, their headquarters can be built next to the Rex Elementary. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Bob. Is there anyone else that has a comment that would like to speak to this?
Good morning. I'm Leslie Batchelor. My office is at 301 North Harvey. I'm addressing the committee this morning to ask you to enforce your guidelines and regulations, and more significantly, to make the decision that's in the long-term best interests of the development of Oklahoma City and its downtown. I think we need to make a hard-nosed economic decision today, and hard decisions are sometimes the right ones, even when another decision seems easier to make. I'd ask that we keep in mind 2 basic economic principles, and that is that we live in a global economy where our city is competing with cities all over the world, where talent and capital can go anywhere. Secondly, I'd ask us to focus on the fact that scarcity and certainty increase value in real estate, and therefore historic and architecturally significant buildings enhance property values and generate long-term economic returns. Because they're scarce, they're valuable, and we can't simply build more of them. So the best way to generate economic growth for Oklahoma City in the long run and to increase real estate values downtown is to preserve Stage Center. That's what the guidelines call for, and that's what should be done today. Everyone here is well aware of Oklahoma City's history of failing to save significant buildings. But what's commonly misunderstood is that most of the time, those buildings were commonly thought to be obsolete, and that in many instances, it was the owners themselves who sought to demolish them. While it's more comforting to believe that some bad guy public agency called Urban Renewal came in and snatched valuable architectural gems and demolished them, the greater weight of the common opinion at the time that buildings like the Criterion and the Baum building were demolished is that there was no way to save them and that it was harmful to our downtown to have them here. We had a vision of the future that did not include those buildings. Now I think most of us recognize that that was a mistake. We didn't take the long view then, but we've grown up as a city, and I think we can take the long view now. One of the ways in which we've grown up as a city is that we now have the Downtown Design Review Ordinance. We recognize that we need to steer development, good development like the one proposed today, to undeveloped sites and sites where the buildings truly should be demolished. We know we have lots of those sites downtown, within a 4-block radius of this site. And as a community, it's incumbent upon us to help developments like this one land where they should go. These things ought to happen in our city, but they ought to happen in the right place. Saving historic buildings is hard. When the Skirvin Hotel had been abandoned, walking through that building, one would have thought it could never be saved. And in many ways, that building was much, much more difficult to save than Stage Center, because the features that make it truly special were the architectural details, the plasterwork, the woodwork, the parquet floors that were destroyed by abandonment and over time. What makes Stage Center really valuable architecturally is the overall design. It's largely concrete and metal. The things that have been lost in Stage Center are the drywall in the basement, the mechanical and electrical, the things that would have to be upgraded anyway. This building is not a total loss. Let's recognize that it didn't even flood until recent years. It did just fine for years, and there are changes that can be made. We have an opportunity today to make the right decision, to really think long-term, to help OG&E's project go forward, to help Mr. Williams' project go forward, but to find the right site for it in downtown Oklahoma City. Stage Center is not the right site for it, and under the DDRC regulations, the decision must be to deny the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Yes, sir?
My name's Rob Elliott, Elliott Architects. Our address is 900 Northwest 6th Street in Oklahoma City. And Ms. Batchelor, I think, said a lot of the comments that I won't repeat. I'd like to lead with this comment. This really is a true test of preservation for our town. Stage Center is of no fault of the floods or the bodies. I think there's more bodies in Nichols Hills over the last 40 years than we'll find downtown. These are things that we can fix. Nothing will ever be like Stage Center. Nothing will ever be built like it again. And we have it, and we need to keep it.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am? It's fine. Go ahead. I think we're wrapping up here, so please give us your comments.
I'm Jill Adler. I live at 21 Northeast 3rd Street, and I'm a public citizen. I have no interest in the Stage Center other than personal, and I hate to speak in public. So I'm speaking because I feel really passionate about this. I moved to Oklahoma City a long time ago when the downtown was a disaster. It's wonderful now. I love to take people downtown. I love to show them around. And every time I drive past the Stage Center, they say, "Wow, what is that?" And in fact, some of them say, "That's the coolest thing I've seen," and I've been in a lot of cities. And every time I turn the corner and I see the Stage Center, I go, wow. I mean, it lifts your heart. I know some people think it's ugly. To me, it's beautiful. And it's something different. It's something unique. When I see someone talking about possibilities, I think, look at the possibilities of this building. I mean, the plans that have been shown to you all are no more real than what we could do if we just got together as a community and tried to save the structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adler.
If there's no more speakers, there are just just a couple quick points that I'd like to address.
Catherine Montgomery, Preservation and Design Studio, 1300 North Chartel. Well, good morning. I have to remind myself to say that because I kind of get carried away and with my thoughts and forget to actually express my appreciation for the important work that you do. I've worked with some of you in another life, actually helping you to redevelop your buildings and reap the tax credit benefits from doing so. Stage Center has a completed National Register nomination. It's been vetted through the city process, the state process, and been sent to the keeper of the National Register in Washington, D.C. A decision has already been made on that nomination, that the building is eligible for the National Register at the national level of significance. It's not just important to Oklahoma City. It's not just important to the state of Oklahoma. This is a building that has been recognized at the national level of significance. In Oklahoma, we only have about 24 buildings that are National Historic Landmarks. Not to say that this is actually an NHL, but it's one step closer being recognized at the national level of significance. An individual property cannot be listed on the National Register without the owner's consent, and that's why it remains on the desk of the keeper in Washington, D.C. until, as Barrett explained, the call comes through. This is a downtown design review committee, and I think sometimes in the presentations, the whole aspect of design gets lost in the explanations and the decision-making. We're also a community. Some of us are on opposite sides of the table today on this issue, and tomorrow we'll shuffle around and we'll be teaming up on other projects. Indeed, many will not stand before you because they can't. They have jobs that prevent them from being where I'm at right now. There are perceived conflicts of interest because of the jobs they have, whether those are public jobs or private jobs. There are some people who are intimidated by the size of the players in the equation. So I stand here today for all of those people that couldn't come because they had a job they had to go to, or for all of those people who I don't have that conflict anymore as a private business owner. And I'm also a member of the Chamber of Commerce. Some of the points that were made earlier today, on one of the studies that was conducted, there were technical problems with the building being redeveloped, and it didn't have some amenities. Technical problems can very often be building systems. Remember the days when computers were coming forward. In fact, this building was designed in thinking about circuitry. When computers were coming on board and buildings were being demolished left and right because they didn't have the clear floor-to-ceiling distance required to accommodate the raised flooring. We don't even need that anymore because we have Wi-Fi. How many of those buildings could have been saved if only they'd have waited 10 or 20 years? Amenities can often be appliances and cabinets. It's amazing how many projects I work on where it's not about the building at all. It's about the stuff that we put in it, like sound systems and stage gear and light systems. The user's needs and program were considered in the schematic documents that you saw today. And I also agree with Barrett that we're not really considering those things. However, it's interesting to note that some of the programmatic spaces that have been talked about include things like a conference center, daycare. I've designed a couple of those in my lifetime. green roofs. To me, those kinds of things can also be used here, can be redeveloped. Stage Center can be redeveloped for some of those things. It's already got stages for corporate meetings and presentations. On some faces, it sets back. Stage Center sets back. Children still play during the arts festival in and around this sculptural form. Buildings cost money to maintain. Not everything has been done to explore the redevelopment of Stage Center, even as a part of the current development that's being considered or proposed in the future. It's really exciting, some of the tenants that might be going into the new development, because those are tenants that all of us basically don't have a choice but to support with our dollars, because they provide our electrical utilities. If we're on the grid, we're supporting that. They're a great, in fact, OG&E is a great corporate community partner supporting many nonprofit organizations and community programs. I think this is a perfect opportunity. A Facebook that was launched a couple of years ago actually has a couple of design ideas there. Some of them are kind of far-reaching, but the whole point is, how can you save Stage Center, repurpose it, use it, and have a tower? I think you can have it all. I think that Stage Center is the dot on the exclamation point of Film Row. As you know, as business owners and community leaders, things usually don't work, or they never work, if we decide that they can't work. But if we decide that they can work, we have a much greater opportunity for success. So I would support the position of my colleagues and those people who can't stand before you today, that you deny the application for demolition and encourage the development to include the redevelopment of Stage Center, which can also realize 20% state tax credits and 20% federal tax credits, offsetting the redevelopment of that building by 40%. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Would you like to summarize quickly?
Yeah, I will keep it brief. I think it's important to note the key differences in the Skirvin project and this project. The Skirvin is a publicly owned building. That is a project that took $20 million of public money to renovate. But even in addition to that, the key difference is the Skirvin could be repurposed for its original intended use. Here, this building cannot. And I go back to the Webb study when they say they are fundamentally not optimistic about the idea of renovating Stage Center as a multi-user arts center. So that is a key difference. And finally, my last point is on the issue of the guidelines. If you look at the definition of a guideline, it is as follows: a general rule or piece of advice, i.e. it's a suggestion. There are 2 mentions of demolition within the DDRC regulations, and both of them use the word should. And that's legally significant because the use of the word should rather than shall means it's not compelling. I cannot believe that the use of the word should within the DDRC guidelines would really imagine that a building that has fallen into disrepair should remain forever and ever and block the key redevelopment of this site. With that, we would ask for your approval, and we thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Now we want to take some time for the committee to ask any questions and make comments as you would like to. You're sitting next to me.
Well, clearly we're on the horns of a dilemma here, and I think all of us sitting up here take this very seriously, and it's, no matter what decision's made, everyone's not going to be happy, that's clear. And I think, as Catherine knows, I am a preservationist, and I think Dick and I have demonstrated that, as others have. clearly this is an iconic structure. I don't think there's any doubt of that. And I agree that it's recognized not only here but around the world. The problem I see is that, if you listen to Peter and others, and I think we've all had conversations about this structure over the years, it's just not very functional. And unlike the Skirvin and some of these other projects that have been renovated to repurpose, I think it will be extremely difficult to repurpose this facility. And for years, there have been various champions that have carried the flag, of trying to preserve this structure. And they've all fallen by the wayside. And I would say at this point in time, if any of you people out there, anybody wants to take Rainey out of this deal and do something with this project, we're all ears. But so far, there have not been any angels or other people that are financially able or willing or whatever to do anything with this building. So that's a concern. And based on what I think the best that can happen is that you weld the doors shut and paint it, and it's a big work of art. And I know there's a lot of sentimental attachment to that. And I think it's very cool. But in the real world, I do think that life goes on, and we need to, as a city, look forward to, the long-term needs of our citizens, what's best. And clearly, Devon kind of set the mark here. Kempker, build it and they will come, and I think that's kind of what's happening around Devon, and I think that's what will continue to happen. I guess my concern is, we're all still have the hangover from the I and pay, let's tear it down and see what happens plan. And I don't want to see that happen here. So I'm inclined to approve the demolition of this project pending a plan that's presented to stick a shovel in the ground and start construction of this deal. In other words, I don't want to see it sit there as a vacant lot for 2 or 3 years until something happens. So that's kind of where I am on the deal, and I'd be interested in hearing my other committeemen.
It's a toughie. Been here 17 years, drive by it, take friends by it. Wow, that's terrific. Let's go see something there. I go, can't. I toured it when I think Befford had it listed, and I personally, as a developer, had no interest in it. Nothing could really be done with it. I think over the last few years, several people have had a chance for a rebirth. Has not occurred. With endowments, with subsidies, everything you can think of. City Council just put out a list of buildings that we need to take down all over the city. They're a danger, they're a blight. I'm a developer, and we redeveloped several buildings. We're delighted with it, but we brought them back to their natural purpose, i.e. Skirvin, Montgomery, Classen, Park Harvey. I can't see this. I walked through, believe me, I visited with several people. Can we do something with this? It's a tremendous location. So that's on the one side. Everyone loves to look at it, but no one can use it. On the other side is Oklahoma City needs to continue the redevelopment of downtown. The school needs students. Film row restaurants and galleries need people. I would reluctantly, very reluctantly, favor the demolition of the Stage Center because there's really nothing else that can be done with it at this point. The lipstick on the pig, these plans are pretty exciting. And the developer, the proponent of this development is extremely capable, has the right team to do it, and has the right tenant. You give me that lease and I'll turn it into magic as well. But we just can't continue to have a structure like that, that's dangerous, that doesn't function in any way, shape, or form. Have you all toured it? You need to tour it. It's pretty bad. It's real bad. It's not just systems and FF&E. The structure itself doesn't work. So I'm kind of with Chuck on it, and I think we need to grant the application to demolish it and support them the best way we can, which is what we do on the design of a new complex. Thank you.
Well, I'm the new kid on the committee, so I have not toured it, and I haven't taken as seriously all the discussions about this building that I've heard over the years. But I do have questions, and one is, there was an RFP. I know that. I know that there were 2 responses and nobody had any money. How long of a time were people given to respond to that RFP? That's one question. Do the people that want to save this building have an idea that they're floating around, they're not telling anyone, of what we can do with this building? And if you have an idea, how long will it take that we would leave this building like it is before something happens?
As to your question on the RFP, Ms. Anthony is here and can address that.
I'm Nancy Anthony, President of Oklahoma City Community Foundation at 1000 North Broadway. The Community Foundation received title to the entire property of the building. We had title to the land, but the entire property in July 1 of 2011. We began the process at that time and began to talk about this process of the RFP. So it was very widely known that we were going to do it. In terms of when was it actually finished, we worked with the American Institutes of Architects as well as another group in town to actually, and the bulk of the material was actually prepared by the AIA and the Urban Land Institute. So they were the people that were responsible for doing it and for circulating it. So probably there was I'm going to guess at least a 3-month period formally when the RFP was available, but in actuality, the availability of the property for that was probably known since at least July of that period of time, as well as maybe even the period of the year before when it was pretty well known that the Arts Council was going to give the property back to the city. So technically 3 months, but probably in actuality more like 7 or 8. And it was a pretty broad RFP. It was available. It was almost anything could be provided if it had to consider the building. Obviously, that's what we were trying to do, is can you repurpose the building? Secondly, it needed to be consistent with what was going on downtown. And thirdly, it needed to be financially viable, because we decided you couldn't kick the can down the road one more time. We needed to deal with the property one way or the other. Thank you. Unless there are any other questions.
And that RFP was put out when was the RFP put out? 2012?
No, it was 2011 through February the 29th of 2012.
2012.
And actually, it was basically left open after that.
Right. Could have been, someone could have come forward.
Right. In other words, we basically were still, the property wasn't listed until the following.
Correct. Right.
Probably about 6 months later. Right. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Well, I'm actually hoping that Catherine's going to come up and answer phase 2 of my question, which is how much longer, and do you have any ideas?
I just also wanted to add something to the RFP process. I was the president of the local chapter of the AIA at the time of that issuance, and I was one of the authors on that report. We included the results of that report, and including photographs of the building that we took a tour of at that time on a website. And a lot of the conditional representations of the building, in my mind, are inconsistent with my own personal findings, especially built on my career as a historic preservation architect. And secondly, we felt that the period of time in writing the RFP was actually very small, because it didn't really give larger operations an opportunity to seriously consider that they could actually have an opportunity to have the building, nor did they have the opportunity to consider what kinds of financial resources they might have available to actually make a response. The two responses that came in, one was very exciting and I thought very well thought out. The other one was very interesting, but not as, didn't have as much energy in the production of it. So, neither one of them had met the financial conditions that the foundation wanted to have. And I believe that that's simply a matter of time and advertisement. It wasn't really left up to the volunteer force that had produced the RFP to actually advertise the RFP. So I think that there could have been a much more vigorous effort employed to actually make it known that this was out for receipt of proposals.
I have another question, and Nancy, you could address this if you would. Was there consideration given to extending the RFP for a longer period of time?
Well, we wanted to come to some finality at some point in time. So yes, at that point in time, with the two proposals that were given, we actually offered both of those groups a right of first refusal for a period of up till the end of September if they chose to come back and have an opportunity if there was anything else that came along. So because we were not a government entity, the RFP deadlines, the process was really a guideline, so to speak. There wasn't a law that we were breaking by extending it or not extending it. So it was a time frame that the foundation set because we felt like we needed to make a decision and continue to keep going. But was it extended? It could have been if anyone had come forward. And in all honesty, we told, when we worked with the American Institute of Architects and the Urban Land Institute, we said it is not necessarily in our purview to know how to do this, so we left the advertisement and the promotion of it up to them. So whatever promotion had came from them.
Okay, so to me, this still seems like an opportunity. I haven't been to the Stage Center since it closed or since the floods occurred, but I had been there beforehand, and I definitely enjoyed the plays that were put on there at Carpenter Square. But the way I see this as a big historical building, and so much so that it is in places like New York, the model of it, to me, this is a big deal. And it's hard for me to reconcile the historical side of this with, I understand, the economical aspect of this. And it is going to be a hard choice for us. But I believe that as far as preservation, we should stick to what we know as far as these guidelines. We have to have a point to stand on, and I think that's where we need to be.
Connie, do you have another question?
Well, again, because I haven't been here that long, I don't know if I saw you nodding also. I haven't seen this building since the flood. I haven't seen the damage, and I definitely wouldn't be able to vote to demolish it or to allow demolition of it without looking at it. If that's where we're going, I would want to look at it first.
All right. Does any other person on the committee feel that way? That you would want to view the building? We have certainly done that in the past. I know Dick's been in it recently. I have not been in it recently. I have been certainly all through the building in the past and have studied all the documents. So, okay.
I appreciate that you want to tour it. You can kind of partially tour it, just looking at some of those pictures. But I think at this time, and our responsibility is to come up with a decision, not continue a tour. We did that before. Sometimes we have, sometimes we haven't. I would entertain a motion to approve the application at this time. Oh, okay. I don't mind at all. I move to approve the demolition of the Stage Center.
would second that on one condition, that we conditionally approve the application to demolish the Stage Center subject to approval of his future plans for the development. I mean, what I don't want to have happen is we go in there with a bulldozer tomorrow and nothing happens for 3 years or 2 years or whatever. But pending that, I would vote for the demolition of the building.
I would just, my opinion is that you should not condition demolition on approval of something else later. I think the demolition, you need to look at the merits, because I don't think we can make somebody, construct something. I think they've committed to that in their materials, and I think you just have to, can take their word for that. But I don't think we should.
Well, let me ask the applicant. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree with Ms. Randall, and I think that Mr. Ainsworth and the rest of the committee can take comfort in we're not just seeking the CA for the demo and telling you this is what we hope and think. We've gone a step further. Tab 6 in your binder are things that we are committed to. We have agreed to do it, committed to do it, not only here in the public forum, but we've done it through our filings with the city. So I think the committee can have great comfort that what you're fearing will not happen. You're going to see applications come forward, and they're going to be consistent with the commitments that this applicant has made.
David, what was, it's purchased, right? It's owned by the developer, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he paid 4 point something?
I'm not sure the exact price, but yes, it is purchased.
I don't think he wants to just sit on it.
I would agree with that.
He's already laid out for him on plus all the soft costs. I don't think they're going to be sitting on it. But I agree. You can't condition one with the other.
Well, my question is, when are you going to tear it down?
And how much?
I understand your concern. It's certainly legitimate. I think you understand my concern. I think one of the reasons we put this package together, and frankly, why I took this project on, I was not involved until it had run its course. And clearly, this building was where it was, and somebody needed to do this. Obviously, I was fortunate to work with OG&E, and our thought was the combination. Obviously, I've been here my entire life. I'm going to be here the rest of my life, and obviously OG&E is leading corporate citizens. So we hope that combination will assure you that it will get done as promised. Otherwise, I keep running into all of you too many places, so I don't want to leave.
And the point is, we are going to move just as fast as feasibly possible on then coming forward with, the DDRC will have a shot at looking at the design of the building. But until we get this first step, we can't move forward with this opportunity.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
For the applicant. If we did deny this application to demolish the building, and that were upheld, would you consider still developing this site with the proposed office building? And is there a way that you could do that and keep Stage Center as a building intact on that site?
Absolutely not, because if you think about the site, it sits right in the middle of the block. I mean, you can't elevate a building 10 stories up and start it. If nothing else, no elevators, no nothing. It's not possible, in my opinion.
John Johansson himself said that the proof of a building is its use and its occupants. We just have not been able, I think efforts certainly have been made to be able to find viable occupants for the building. They have not come forward. It's just terribly problematic. I have another question, though, to ask you, and it relates to the plan that you presented. It's certainly absolutely a quality-driven site plan. I like everything that I see there. It is not an actual plan We are under guidelines to uphold our ordinance and preserve historic buildings and the exteriors of historic buildings. I think it's very difficult for us, that is our responsibility, and we take it so seriously, particularly with this building and the amount of interest there is in it and its significance. I think it's very difficult for us to approve demolition of a building based upon a site plan which is not actually determinative of what will happen on that site. There are still some question marks. I don't have any reservations about the quality or intentions or the fact that you want to absolutely do a great project. But there remains the fact that we would be voting on demolition today pending seeing something in the future that we don't have an exact plan. We don't know what's going to happen, whether it's going to be hotel, retail. We don't have specifics on design for that or materials or landscaping or any of the other things that it's our responsibility to consider. So that's my comment. I'd like to know if my fellow committee members have any comments about that as well. What is your comfort level with that?
I mean, clearly, I think Tannenbaum and I think you ought to tear it down. And I guess the question is, do we trust Rainey and OG&E and the rest of this crew to make good and do a quality project? And I'm inclined to think that they will do that. So I would second Dick's motion.
All right. We have a motion to approve demolition of Stage Center. We have a second. And so now I'm going to call for a vote, and I would like a voice vote from the committee.
Aye. Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
We have a tie. And so I assume that I need to vote. Okay. I am going to vote aye. It is a 3-2 vote.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we've just finished the video. We're going to hear from the appellant first. We did have to go a little bit out of order at first to accommodate Mr. Box's client. So we'll hear from Preservation Oklahoma, then we'll hear from Mr. Box and his client, and then we'll hear from members of the public. And I do have slips for everyone that has turned them in during the video. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much. My name is Brett Davis. My address is 5613 North Classen Boulevard here in Oklahoma City. I'm appearing on behalf of Preservation Oklahoma. I have a handout that I'd like to hand the board that would follow my presentation.
Please do.
If I can. And a copy of this handout's been afforded to Mr. Box. First and foremost, I think that what the Board of Adjustment needs to review from the proceedings of the DDRC is that whether or not that the development guidelines as provided in the Oklahoma City Municipal Code were followed. Several of the committee members addressed the guidelines, and I think the guidelines are explicit and express. There are three things that the guidelines provide when dealing with existing structures and historical buildings. And just like we heard earlier from a school teacher, she taught in her school, I'm certain, the 3 R's. And there's 3 R's that deal with the DDRC in relationship to the development guidelines. They are retain, refurbish, remain. If you look at the explicit language, existing buildings, character-defining architectural features, such as buildings' mass, roofs, exterior walls, doors, windows, and architectural dealing should be retained, refurbished, and remain. What is not contained in the DDRC development guidelines is any reference whatsoever to either functional viability or economic feasibility, which is exactly what the DDRC relied on in making its decision. The Board of Adjustment sits in a position to review exactly what should have been done by the DDRC, and it acts as a gatekeeper in order to ensure that the zoning ordinances, especially this one, are followed explicitly by the DDRC. The DDRC is not allowed to expand the parameters as provided in the development guidelines. That's when you're talking about the notion of substantive due process. Substantive due process is exactly at issue here. And we are talking about a government body exceeding the parameters of an express ordinance such as this. And that's exactly what happened here. Functional viability and economic feasibility were simply not allowed to be considered in any of the regulations or guidelines. That's not something that the DDRC should have considered, and as you heard on the video, several of the committee members, or at least a few of the committee members, addressed the development guidelines in that they are to consider the promotion, development, and redevelopment of the downtown area in a manner consistent and compatible with the existing and unique diverse design elements of downtown. And further, in that particular ordinance, it requires the Downtown Design Review Committee and staff, it says shall apply these guidelines. It does not give discretion. It does not give leeway. If you apply the word shall and then simply look at the 3 R's of the DDRC, retain, refurbish, remain. So when you're looking at this particular project, you have a number of equitable factors. You've heard an hour and a half of testimony about the history, about the importance, about functional viability, economic feasibility, an hour and a half of testimony. What you should be focusing on is, did the DDRC apply the black letter of the law as it relates to the demolition application? I maintain that they did not, because the express guidelines, again, state that historic buildings such as this must be retained, refurbished, and remain. Mr. Nichols talked earlier, and he talked about, number one, the coal core building, and also the Overholser Mansion. What happened on those two projects? They were retained, refurbished, and they remain. And that's the exact standard that should be applied in this particular situation. Everyone knows the history of Stage Center as being a unique, one-of-a-kind, nothing else like it structure. It is unique to Oklahoma City that makes it a wonderful architectural marvel. And all of the reports that the DDRC considered, and all the reports that you will consider in reviewing this appeal, address how significant this is. The Downtown Design Review Committee guidelines were drafted and have the spirit to protect this very building. If there was any structure that would fall under the guidelines, it would be this structure. And so what I would say in closing is that as you're sitting as an appellate review committee, it's your job to determine what did the DDRC do, what did they rely on, what were the standards, were those standards properly applied? I can tell you that both the appellant and the respondent, they want to get this right. The Board of Adjustment wants to get this right. And as a duty to not only the appellant, not only the respondent, but also the city, I believe that it's incumbent upon the Board of Adjustment to review and ensure that its ordinances are being followed properly. And in this, it is without a doubt that they were not. That functional viability and economic feasibility were factors that were expressly considered and should have not been. And so I'll close by reiterating the guidelines which should have been followed were based on the 3 R's: retain, refurbish, and remain. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Box?
Council and I had spoken before. He had hoped that several people in support of his application could follow him.
That'd be
I'll
great.
do whatever the chairman wants.
That's
but-
fine with me.
Okay.
If that's the order you'd like to take. If they've turned in slips, I'll just check their name off as you call them.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Montgomery, an architect and historic preservation specialist, founder and president of the Preservation and Design Studio. In 2001, as you heard, I was part of the group of architects that toured Stage Center and found no signs of extreme damage and deterioration. I've consulted on hundreds of Oklahoma buildings and millions of dollars of projects in Oklahoma that have preserved, rehabilitated, or adaptively reused those buildings, including the Skirvin Hotel, the Gold Dome, the Osler Building, just to name a few. Stage Center, or Mummers Theater, as it is known historically, has been deemed eligible for the National Register of Historic Places with a national level of significance. This is an unusual and honorable distinction. Less than 24 buildings in the state of Oklahoma have received such recognition. Indeed, this recognition is key to the current consideration by the National Trust for Historic Preservation for Stage Center to be deemed one of the 11 most endangered cultural resources in the country for this year. This distinction has been made by the foremost authority on such matters. That's the distinction of the national level of significance for the National Register, the keeper of the National Register in Washington, D.C. Indeed, this distinction comes with special consideration because it has been earned before the building is 50 years old. The process for making such decisions is based not on politics or sentiment, but on examination and documentation of the facts surrounding the history of the building. In this case, that history is intertwined with the global history of architectural design of the modern movement. The National Register nomination documenting the building was made a part of the packet before the DDRC, and I hope you have had an opportunity to consider it fully. The theater is one of the few planned projects that was actually implemented from the pay plan in the era of what we now call urban renewal. Myriad Gardens, interestingly enough, is one of the others is the only other one that was cited in the National Register nomination for Stage Center that was actually completed and a part of the pay plan. This time in the 1960s and 1970s represented the spirit of city redevelopment and residents' enthusiasm, not just in Oklahoma, but around the country. It was an optimistic time. Economic decline during the later energy crisis began to dampen the enthusiasm for urban renewal, along with residents beginning to mourn the loss of important historic buildings, and the promise of redevelopment for the then cleared sites waned. That optimistic and enthusiastic time is not unlike this time. Creativity is a popular buzz term with forums and conferences right here in Oklahoma City dedicated to it. Arts districts are gaining momentum and springing up around different parts of the city. The rebirth of established ones and the emergence of new ones. Placemaking and new urbanism and heritage tourism, all claiming that those things that make a place unique should be creatively retained, celebrated, and adaptively reused. Our community, figuratively across the street, Tulsa, has placed a moratorium on demolition in downtown in the interest of retaining that which makes them unique. And indeed, Oklahoma City's own ordinances require consideration of a building's cultural and historical significance and state that such buildings should be retained and adaptively reused. If historic significance is part of the consideration, which it is per the ordinance and incorporated guidelines, then there is not one single building in Oklahoma City of such important and national significance for which that guidance is more applicable than Stage Center. To date, there has been no evidence presented that illustrates design alternatives that seriously consider adaptive reuse as directed by the ordinance and incorporated guidelines, to the same level of consideration for the one option that is dependent upon the demolition of the building. As an expert in adaptive reuse of historic structures, I am confident that many of the functions desired for development in place of or near this building can actually be accommodated successfully by the existing Stage Center building. The preservation and retention of cultural and historic resources is not a beauty contest. It isn't even governed by how a building's design is understood by the misguided or uninformed. We collectively are the stewards of the past for the future. We own a significant historic, to own a significant historic building places one in a high and honorable position of maintaining and protecting the historical record for the education and enjoyment of future generations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Barrett Williamson, Board President of Preservation Oklahoma. I also serve as advisor to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Dear members of the Board of Adjustment, the National Trust for Historic Preservation strongly supports the rehabilitation and adaptive reuse of the Mummers Theater Stage Center and encourages the Board of Adjustment to reconsider the action taken by the Downtown Design Review Committee to permit its demolition. We are concerned that should the demolition proceed, Oklahoma and the country would lose an important piece of modern architecture. The National Trust for Historic Preservation is a privately funded nonprofit organization that works to save America's historic places. With over 750,000 supporters, we take direct, on-the-ground action when historic sites are threatened and advocate with governments to save America's heritage. The 1970 Stage Center is an iconic building in Oklahoma and the work of a master of modern architecture, John M. Johansson, a member of Harvard 5, a student of Walter Gropius. He designed the Stage Center combining ideas of brutalism and connected systems to form the unusual, distinctive theater. Philip Johnson was another member of the Harvard 5, and the National Trust operates his iconic modernist glass house in New Canaan, Connecticut, as one of our organization's historic sites. In 1972, Johansson received the prestigious American Institute of Architects National Honor Award for the Stage Center design, which is regarded as one of his most influential. We note that according to the city's zoning and planning code, the development regulations for the downtown design districts, including the downtown business district, are intended to both, quote, promote the development and redevelopment of the downtown area in a manner consistent with the unique and diverse design elements of downtown, end quote, and to, quote, preserve and restore historic resources, end quote. We contend that the Stage Center is both a unique and diverse design element of the downtown and a historic resource worthy of preservation by virtue of its eligibility for the National Register of Historic Places. This eligibility is at the national level of significance. We encourage your reconsideration of the demolition decision made by the DDRC and appreciate your consideration of our comments. Sincerely, Barbara Paul, Regional Vice President, National Trust for Historic Places. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, David Box, 522 Colcord Drive. The developer, Rainey Williams, is here, and I'm going to have him address a few points before I get up and address the legal issues that are at play in this appeal.
Okay.
Thank you for your time today. I do not have prepared remarks for you, but I did want to start by giving you an opportunity to ask any questions you may have of me, and by reading a couple of letters from some of our supporters who are not able to be here today. The first of those is a letter from Roy Williams, President of the Oklahoma City Chamber. His letter reads, "To the members of the Board of Adjustment, I urge the Board of Adjustment to approve the application for demolition of Stage Center. While the building has architectural significance, it has outlived its useful life and remains a vacant, abandoned, dilapidated structure that is detracting from the exciting changes taking place in the area. With the addition of the Devon Tower, the renovation of the park at the Myriad Gardens, and construction of the John W. Rex Elementary School just across the street, now is the time to redevelop the property. The challenges with Stage Center are not new. Its operational costs and deficiencies have hindered the success of every user, and after a return of the building to the Oklahoma City Community Foundation, the foundation spent several years trying to find a group or groups that would finance renovation of the property and were unsuccessful in doing so. Now we have the perfect opportunity to enhance downtown through the development of this key property with a well-respected developer, Rainey Williams, and the commitment of one of our best corporate citizens, OG&E Energy Corp., to anchor the development with their headquarters. We are excited that OG&E will remain a vital part of the downtown business community. For all of these reasons, I respectfully request that the Board of Adjustment approve the demolition of Stage Center. Sincerely, Roy Williams." Second letter is from Bob Ross, President and CEO of Inasmuch Foundation, who you saw on the video screen. His letter reads, "To the Board of Adjustment, as the President and CEO of Inasmuch Foundation and as a founding board member of John Rex Charter Elementary School, I strongly support OG&E moving its headquarters to the lot currently occupied by the vacant Stage Center. Inasmuch Foundation has committed over $10 million in grants for the preservation and renovation of historic buildings such as Lyric Theater, the old Central High School, the new home of Oklahoma City University Law School, the Gaylord Pickens Oklahoma Heritage Museum, and the Oklahoma City National Memorial. Oklahoma City Community Foundation requested proposals for Stage Center, and I have fielded numerous phone calls and emails with ideas, but no viable option for the dysfunctional building has surfaced. The two most common suggestions include either a not-for-profit theater or creating a children's museum. No not-for-profit theater group exists that can afford to renovate and maintain the building, and it appears that a new children's museum could never assume the liability and expense needed to launch. The vacant building poses safety concerns for John Rex Charter Elementary School, the last Maps for Kids school. Opening this fall and located on the block directly west of Stage Center, the Rex School will have over 500 students when fully enrolled. The present state of Stage Center lends itself to crime and disturbances, and the ramp to the basement currently serves as a homeless camp. This is not what we want next to an elementary school full of children. OG&E is one of Oklahoma's finest organizations and is committed to the betterment of Oklahoma City. As neighbors to the rec school, OG&E employees will be natural partners to volunteer at the school and mentor to some of our city's most underserved children. The risks of letting the downtown block Stage Center occupies to sit empty for years to come are too great. I urge the committee to approve this application and allow OG&E to build its headquarters. With those read, I would ask you if you have any questions of me, or I can turn it back over and we can continue with our prepared presentation.
Questions of Ronnie, or we'll continue?
And I'll be here. I'll be back up, so if you think of anything, feel free to.
Mr. Box, we continue?
Yes, sir. Well, first let me say thank you all for being here, and I know it's been a lengthy presentation, and I will not rehash everything I just said in the last hour and a half. I think it is important to focus on why we're here today, and that is an appeal on the record. And your counselor provided you with a memorandum outlining those details. And so it's important when we look at the black letter of the law that will apply to demolition of structures, there isn't any. There are guidelines. If you read from the city ordinance, it says the Downtown Design Review Committee and staff shall apply the guidelines, but the most important part is next, as appropriate to the specific site. And that's what they did here. Short of any criteria or standards for the DDRC to apply in an application for demolition, they had to fall back on what was reasonable. And your counselor has outlined it very succinctly. The DDRC considered the following two factors: the functional viability of the structure and whether or not retention and restoration of the building is economically feasible for applicants' purposes. These are very key, critical factors. And when we look at what we're doing, reviewing this on the record, there's been nothing presented that can show that the building is functionally viable. The board heard multiple studies done, most of which were done by groups that are designed to find ways to fix these buildings. There was only one study done by a group hired by my client. Every other study was done by groups that were seeking a solution, and there flat out was no solution. And they were forced to then put it out for an RFP, which, as the board heard, went nowhere. But when we look at the standards that we have to apply in this setting, there's been no evidence to contradict the findings of the DDRC that the building lacks functionality. So when we look next to whether retention and restoration of the building is economically feasible for applicants' purposes, the chairperson, Ms. Faulkner, asked my client that exact question, and his response was absolutely not. And if you think about it, what he said is absolutely correct. There's no way to maintain Stage Center and make the development that my client is proposing work. It's not economically feasible. And again, there's been nothing provided by the appellant in this matter that would contradict or show that the DDRC was unreasonable in finding these conclusions. When we look at the guidelines, they're just guidelines. You heard me say on the video that the guideline it's a suggestion. When you look at the definition, it's a piece of advice. There's no standards. When there are no standards, you are forced to apply a reasonable standard. And that's what the DDRC has done in this case, and there has been nothing presented by the appellant or any of the other people that spoke that would warrant overturning. I do want to read one letter that I think is important, and this is from Mr. Bob Blackburn, and he is the executive director of the Oklahoma Historical Society. And what he says really resonates in this case. To the members of the Board of Adjustment, as I have often stated, historic preservation is not about saving all old buildings. It is about making sure that all options are considered when a building with historical significance might be impacted by some action. From experience, there are times when buildings can be saved and adapted for new uses, but there are other times when buildings cannot be saved for a number of reasons, including safety, economic viability, and the needs of the community. There's 3 points in that first paragraph that stick out to me. One, historic preservation is important. It's important in this city, but that doesn't mean every single building that is old is somehow historic and therefore needs to be saved. The second point, and I think it's the most important, is it's about making sure all options are considered. The lengthy studies that went on ensured that all options were considered. You heard Mr. Williams get up and say he didn't get involved and didn't want to get involved till the process was fully vetted, i.e. all options being considered. And finally, there are other times when buildings cannot be saved for a number of reasons, including safety, economic viability, and the needs of the community. Again, you heard multiple people get up and speak to those very issues. And what Mr. Blackburn's letter makes clear is historic preservation is important, but we have to look on a case-by-case basis. And when you apply the factors that the DDRC looked at and you apply what Mr. Blackburn said in his letter, it's clear that the demolition permit that was granted by DDRC based on the reasonableness factors was appropriate. And we would ask for you to uphold the DDRC. I'm here to answer any questions.
I guess the one question I have, and I heard you say it in the tape, when we look at the guidelines, section 597200 G1, it says should and not shall. And it says that in repeated instances. And in my mind, that's legally significant when it says should instead of shall. And that means that there are opportunities when it should not. Can you speak to that, please?
I would agree. If it said shall, then we probably aren't here because it would require the 3 R's. It would require the building to stay. But the fact that it uses the word should means exactly what you said. Then there are times that it should not apply. And when you go back to the other portion that says when it does use the word shall, it limits it by saying as appropriate to the specific site. And our opinion is all factors considered, what's appropriate on this specific site gets to your second point of should, and this is a circumstance in which should means it should be demolished.
Any other questions from Mr. Box? You have some people you want to call in support. David, I've got...
Yes.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is James Loftus. I'm an architect here in Oklahoma City. We come together today to discuss the future of one of Oklahoma City's architectural icons. I don't believe this discussion and deliberation is easy for any of us. I sat in your chair beginning in 1973 as a Mayor Shirk appointment to the Historic Preservation Commission, and more recently as a Mayor Cornett appointment to the Downtown Design Review Committee, ending in 2013. In fact, you may have come across my initials carved in the horseshoe somewhere up there. For your information, I am an architect and currently serve as chair of the Oklahoma City Arts Commission, and I'm completing 15 years of service on the State Licensing Board for Architects. I also was the first architect member of the State Committee for the National Register of Historic Places, and I participated in the first 3,000 nominations to the register. I was attracted to the historic preservation movement by Mayor George Shirk in 1969. We provided leadership for the ownership transition from private to public hands of the Overholser Mansion. When I signed up, he didn't tell me it would take 4 years, and I had to raise $100,000, but that's what we did, and my American Institute of Architects member stayed the course. That transformation led to the birth of the Heritage Hills Homeowners Association neighborhood, one of the city's finest neighborhoods. I observed the construction of the Mummers Theater and took great pride in the acquisition of what many of us felt was a world-class architectural icon. I recall enjoying theater, arts festival parties, and community gatherings. The building's mechanical systems, pedestrian circulation, and honest use of material were there for all of us to see. Interesting enough, however, this approach to design faded in the 70s and 80s. Unfortunately, the design concept lowered the first level several feet below ground, making it subject to flooding, as Oklahoma City received several 100-year rains. Our American Institute of Architects officed in that basement and suffered some $150,000 worth of uncompensated damages during the first flood in the 90s. Efforts to correct this problem were overwhelmed again by a later flood. I have provided several professional services down through the years for the Stage Center and can testify to some of the building's eccentricities. Stage Center was originally conceived as a dedicated theater venue, 3 theaters, few windows, all housed in a concrete shell. Although I believe there may be another use for this facility, great diligence has been exercised by the indomitable Jim Talbert, the arts community, and the American Institute of Architects to find another viable user without success. When Sandridge came to the Downtown Design Review Committee asking for renovation approval, we struck a bargain for new pedestrian-friendly parks and a first-rate renovation of the Braniff building. Although many of us have dreaded this day, I think it is time to square up on this issue and transition to a new beginning for the Stage Center site. One consideration I would offer would be to include a dedicated publicly accessed collections room in the new facility, which would tell the story of the site from the land run through Stage Center, so that this unique architectural icon is not forgotten, but is celebrated. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Loftus.
Yes, sir.
Any questions of Mr. Loftus? Okay.
Unless there are specific questions of me or anyone you've heard, we're happy to hear from the public.
Is that okay with you, Mr. Davis? Okay. Mr. Edwards?
Good afternoon. I'm Carl Edwards. My address is 2925 Regency Court. My office address is the Oklahoma Tower. I've been around this town now for over 40 years, and I've watched the Mummers Theater become Stage Center, and lots of efforts have been made to make it economically feasible, make it able to be utilized safely by our public. I've been on various committees through the Arts Council to try to raise money to come up with a solution to the number of problems that have continued to be talked about today and in the presentation before. I wish that there was a way that I could feel comfortable that something would be done to save this property. Nobody's been willing to put up the kind of money it takes. There's lots of safety issues. As chairman of the Mats for Kids Trust, I have to tell you I'm a little concerned about having a building in this kind of shape that Stage Center's in, with the kind of homeless issues, people around it, with children right across the street. I think it would be much better to be able to look to a nice new building with people in it who will be able to tutor and help those young people grow up in a community like Oklahoma City and want to stay there. If I had anything I could leave you with, it would be that, great old buildings that have the ability to be repurposed are wonderful to have in our community. I believe that this building has passed its prime, past its ability to be repurposed. Efforts from everybody have been followed to try to make it be repurposed, and since it can't, I would say that the building should be demolished and a new building built there. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pickle?
My name is James Pickle. My home address, 8420 Northeastern. I'm in a funny position, like James Loftus mentioned. I've been working on Stage Center now for 25 years. As a former member of the board of the Oklahoma City Arts Council, as a trustee of the Kirkpatrick Center Affiliated Fund, and as a contractor. The building in my tenure in these 25 years has suffered through 3 floods. We were actually the contractor in 1991 when $1.4 million was spent on the building to reopen it as a performing arts center. The $1.4 million didn't go very far. Our task with the architect at the time was Rand Elliott, was to put in a new mechanical system and to bring the building up to ADA standards. That included the restrooms, that included handrails, we added an elevator, we added a little automatic sliding chair in one of the ramps, all to make the building ADA compliant at that time. And we reopened the building. When I say we, this was all with the Arts Council group, the primary leaders at the time being Jim Talbert, whose name you've heard before today, and also Liz Eichmann. Jackie Jones, one of the previous directors of the Arts Council, was involved, and Liz Eichmann actually managed the Performing Arts Center after we opened it. Then we had the first flood. As James Loftus mentioned, the basement flooded to the level of 8 feet, and that's when the American Institute of Architects local office lost all of their valuable properties, as well as some of the performing arts groups. We cleaned the building. We hired a civil engineer. We attempted to stop any future floods. The building flooded again. And that's when we started the process of shutting the building down. And then there became additional monies, it gets reopened, it gets flooded again, and the group of us that have spent these 25 years to refurbish this building basically have given up. One of the things we have found, if you save this building as a performing arts center, we did 3 estimates to save it. The first one was just to get it reopened, get the electricity on, make this building just open. And it was in a neighborhood of around $7 million. The second estimate had a few more features to make the Performing Arts Center more workable. And it started getting into the $11 million range. Then we started looking at replacing all the seats in all the theaters, replacing stage lighting, replacing sound systems, literally making it a first-class performing arts center for the city of Oklahoma City. And that got into the range of $20 million. We worked with the city of Oklahoma City to see if there were any public monies, because any performing arts center, whether it's Oklahoma City, Tulsa, New York City, San Francisco, we found 2 things have to be in place, one or the other. It either has to be subsidized by the city, or it has to have a huge endowment to where it can be subsidized through endowment funds. We couldn't get either. We could not get the support of the corporate community. Various reasons. Some weren't that interested in the performing arts, some didn't like the building. Whatever it was, the money wasn't there. The money wasn't there from the city. We couldn't get it in a MAPS project. Money wasn't there in the corporate community. And after a point in time, we said, we're abandoning the building and we're going to revert ownership from the Oklahoma City Arts Council to the Kirkpatrick Center Affiliated Fund. And that's when the process started, to when the Affiliated Fund did the RFP process, and now all these many months later, here we are. Is the building architecturally significant? In my opinion, it is. Is it historically significant? My opinion, it's not. Can it be renovated as a performing arts center? Yes, with enough money, but then you can't subsidize it. Can it be repurposed? We looked at this building about 2 years ago for another client, an arts-related organization, but not particularly a performing arts center. And yes, we figured out for what we really wanted to do for between $30 and $40 million, it could be repurposed. The problem is, all of these numbers, nobody's really willing to pay the tab. Nobody wants to do it. The most recent organization that had some money, they decided to move to another location and build something from scratch. And in fact, they probably had the best chance of anybody to make this thing work in any form or fashion. We couldn't do it. We know through the RFP process that we could not get viable proposals from anyone who had the money to make this happen. What we've concluded, and when I say we, this is the group of people that have been working now for 25 years, is it's time to let it go. One of our party was a very close friend of the original architect of the building, and it's probably been the hardest for him to let this go. But we cannot save this building. The only way you can save it, I think somebody earlier said, paint it and use it as a piece of sculpture. In my opinion, that's not a good use of this city block in downtown Oklahoma City. I have great sympathies for the historic preservation groups, certainly the American Institute of Architects. The last thing I want to do is get into arguments with architects. But this thing has no more life in it. It's a dead building. If you took the time to go into that building, take an armed guard, and it will scare you to death. The building has been stripped. Anything of value that was there is gone, and the building has died. So I would strongly support, as I hate to say this, the demolition of this significant architectural icon, but it has no more life in it. Thank you all for your service.
Thank you. Ms. Anthony?
Thank you. Nancy Anthony. I live at 3605 North McKinley, and I'm the president of the Oklahoma City Community Foundation. I'll try not to rehash anything. I went to work for John Kirkpatrick 28 years ago. At that point in time, he had acquired the building because he had paid off the second of the last group of theater companies that had failed in the building. So basically, from that point, or for the last 28 years, I've been involved with a variety of groups of people trying to figure out what in the world to do with this and how to do something. And I'd have to say, especially from Mr. Kirkpatrick's point of view, as well as many of the other groups, anybody that had come forward at that time with any ideas and any money would have been welcome. And that's been the challenge all along with the building. And I would have to say, to not repeat either of the two previous speakers, a tremendous amount of effort's been made by a lot of people over this community because they love the building and wanted to see if they could make it work. I couldn't figure it out. We worked, we calculated, we went at it 100 different ways. The building was well known. Architects from all over the country would write about it. Developers would write about it, but nobody would ever come forward and do anything. So number one is there just didn't seem to be any viable opportunities over the last 28 years. The second point being that both the Community Foundation and the Arts Council have, over the last 3 years, since the building has not been functional, tried to maintain it in the community so that it wasn't an eyesore. And that's not inexpensive. I think between the two of us, we've probably spent more than $350,000 in that 3-year period of time, keeping the birds off the roof, trying to secure it. That is, the reason that everything has been stolen out of it is it's almost impossible to secure, to deal with the water to the extent that we can. It is just to leave it there is not without a significant cost to somebody, unless you just, I guess, put a fence around it and let it die. But I don't think it can just be painted. And someone said, well, why don't you mothball it? I said, well, other than throwing mothballs into it, I don't know that there's anything else you could do to it. So having said that, then I just wanted to let you know that I feel like that there's been a lot of effort. It's a tough thing, but a lot of people have tried extremely hard. And thank you for your concern.
Thank you. Mr. DeLisi?
Hello. My name is Peter DeLisi, and I'm the Executive Director of the Arts Council of Oklahoma City. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to this. I've been working for the Arts Council since 1989, so I'm kind of the rubber meets the road guy, one of the people that has actually had to try to make things work in that facility over many, many years. And I'm just going to tell you a short story about in the heyday, when it was really being used a lot. We had a storytelling festival that we put on there, and we used both theaters, and we used all the rooms in the basement as part of the event. And so it was a conference, and so we'd have workshops on storytelling that would go on in the basement. We would have as many as 200 people at the conference part of the event. And I would start out each morning by gathering everyone together in the auditorium, and I'd say, now, I know that some of you are going to get a little panicked when you get lost in this building. And I don't want you to worry. I just want you to find an exit door and look for these green signs, and I would point to the green exit signs around the building. I'd say, head to the exit, go out of the building, and then walk back around to the front door and let the signage lead you back to where you need to be. That's the kind of thing that we would have to deal with there. People would get lost. It was a very, very tough room to use, just in using it. And that's not even talking about the fact that it's pretty much broke the back of every nonprofit that has ever been in it. If you look back on the history, they left because they just couldn't do it anymore. And in our case, when I started back in '89, we had the festival, Fall Festival, which we used to do, and we did a Business in the Arts Awards that we had. We ran the 4th of July celebration in the summertime. We had a lot of different programs that once we got the Arts Commandos, another group where we supplied over 600 volunteers to a variety of different nonprofit agencies throughout Oklahoma City. When we got into Stage Center, we systematically got out of several of those projects. Now, it wasn't the only reason we got out of them. There were a variety of reasons, but one of them was definitely that we funneled all monies that we had into the Stage Center building that were not absolutely necessary for things like the Festival of the Arts. So we'd had to redirect funding. Pickle did a great job of telling you, and he was right there, on the board, just working so hard. And then the command would come down from the board, make this work. And as a staff, it was extremely difficult to make it work. It was very, very difficult to pay for the building from one year to the next. We had a chiller go out one time, and this isn't in the budget. A chiller costs $100,000. And, of course, there were performances that were going on in the building. So as the performer, you've got to do something, and you've got to do it immediately. You can't, they're going to lose revenue on the shows if it's too cold or too hot. We'd have to try to replace a chiller. When we got out of that building, I was able to work with our board to start a new program called Art Moves. And for $100,000, which is approximately what it costs us annually to put on Art Moves, it's a daily noontime performance schedule. Every day of the week, Monday through Friday, 255 performances annually in downtown Oklahoma City. In the first year, we were able to serve 46,000 people with that program, with just $100,000. So for us, our mission being to bring the arts and the community together, we have to look every single day at those dollars that we raise and how do we best use those dollars to reach the community and to make our mission a reality. And it's just very difficult for us. We would not want to go back into that building. I can't imagine that the Arts Council of Oklahoma City's board would elect to go back in with all that's happened. And quite frankly, there are many other exciting, robust uses for money that we can put into practice in our community. And we're very excited about that. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We have one other person, Ms. Broswell, Megan Broswell. Okay, I guess she's already left. With that, we'll do a brief summation from Mr. Davis and then from Mr. Box, and then the board can ask any questions of either party, if that's okay with my fellow board members.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to direct the board's attention to, the staff report that went to the DDRC highlights exactly what the appellant's position is. In issues and considerations, it addressed the development guidelines. And the first sentence of the staff recommendation, dated January 16, 2014, states, "This proposal does not comply with the development guidelines of the Downtown Design District Zoning Ordinance as follows." And then goes on to recite Section 7200, subsection G, subsection 1. The staff recommendation was to deny the application. There was a question earlier that addressed the autonomy or the discretion of the Downtown Design Review Committee in looking at words such as should rather than shall. I'd like to direct also the board's attention to the DDRC's bylaws, Article 7, Section 1. And the bylaws state that the development guidelines will be applied. Doesn't say may. The development guidelines, I maintain, are mandatory. It says shall. It doesn't say may. And so, in summation, I would say that as a, like I said earlier, a gatekeeper of subordinate committees, it is the board's duty to ensure that the ordinances are being applied properly. And I would maintain that in this particular instance, the DDRC exceeded its grounds, exceeded its authority, and on that basis that their decision must be reversed. Thanks.
Mr. Boggs?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one point on the staff report. Staff did recommend denial, but we think staff was in error in the recommendation. If you read the recommendation, it is based on the proposal does not comply with the guidelines. Then they cite 3 sections that all use the word should. When you use the word should, there isn't something to comply with or fail to comply with. So we think their recommendation was an error. We think the DDRC took the appropriate course of action in applying a reasonable standard. We would ask you to uphold their decision. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very, very difficult decision. On one hand, you have to respect the role historic preservation plays, and on the other hand, you have to do what's in the best interest of Oklahoma City. And we have clearly heard today a long list of factors of how these resources have been exhausted, how economically this deal has gone through several cycles, and now where we come to today. I had one question. None of the owners, this one, and any of them preceding, David, this for you, have ever consented. I know you can go file the registration, but the owners have to consent to that being happened, right?
Yes, that is correct.
I mean, it seems to me like we're in a situation, and this is the part that, and I agree it's a very unique project. I agree it's very, it's got a lot of areas why it's not old historic. It is historic, but it's like we're trying to force someone to consent to it, and they're the owner of the property. That's a kind of... I mean,
that's correct. It was, the application was done by a third party without the consent of the owner.
Right.
And the owner declined to have it registered because, and that was only after all the other steps had been done and all the studies had been done. And that's why we're in this situation that we are.
And I had that same question, but the other question I had was, if it's not functionally viable, or if it is functionally viable, the question is it economically viable going forward? And so I was wondering why it never became a part of the MAPS program. And is it because even if it's refurbished, if it's fixed, it's not economically viable going forward?
I can't answer that. I think the fact that it was never listed is telling. But I can't answer the specific reason as to why it was never included in a MAPS program.
It took 3 years for, I mean, that's a good question. It took 3 years from the point it became a request for proposal from the Community Foundation to even find a buyer willing to take the economic risk of development to go this far. So I think that period of time speaks to the fact that, you know, there was the feasibility of the actual facility wasn't possible. The rehab, I mean, that's a distinguishing factor in my mind.
And I think Mr. Tannenbaum is in a unique position to address that, and you heard his comments. He toured it when it was listed, and he tried to find a way to make it work, and he flat out couldn't.
I concur. I mean, we heard the testimony, and the studies have indicated that even if the building is restored, and there's no single or group of arts groups that are even viable users of the facility. So even if you fix the building, you've got nowhere to go. There's nobody viable that's presented themselves to use it. I am, when the discussion is over, I'm ready to present a motion.
This is clearly a very difficult issue for a lot of different people. And, I agree that there's been a lot of energy put into this building over the years, and that there have been many good faith attempts to find alternative uses for it. I can remember, when the Arts Council was using this building, and the headaches that were sort of a daily occurrence with respect to its many idiosyncrasies and the difficulties that there are in just maintenance of it. I mean, it's maybe the last significant structure in the United States that was built before we cared whether things were energy efficient. It's a nightmare to run and to maintain, and it has been all these years, I think. But I guess I am coming at this from a very different perspective of any of that. I don't think whether it's economically feasible or functionally viable has anything to do with the decision that we're making here today, and I don't think that it is appropriate for us to consider that. Having been about this big a part of the Skirvin renovation, I just keep asking myself, all of those years that building sat there empty, and all of those years that people came forward and there wasn't a financially feasible or economically viable use for it, or the technology hadn't caught up with the possibility of renovating it. And what if someone had torn it down? It would be gone. The idea of whether the building can be used for its original purpose or not, I think, is irrelevant. The Skirvin is still a hotel, that's true, but there were substantial changes made to the building, and I was one of those people who walked through it. It was scary. It was falling apart. It was dangerous. But we didn't tear it down. I don't think that the question of whether the building is on the National Register has anything to do with forcing anybody to consider something or to take on something that they don't want to take on. It's simply a point being made that this is, in fact, an historically significant structure. Maybe, as James Pickle said, more specifically an architecturally significant building than an historically significant one, although as the last building built before we cared if things were energy efficient, maybe it's got some claim to fame. But I can't support the demolition of the building. I don't think it was appropriate for the Design Review Committee to base its decision on the economic viability or the functional viability of the building. I think it needs to be preserved. I think it should be preserved, and I wouldn't be sleeping tonight if I didn't vote to preserve it. So,
Mr. Voorhees, Mr. Stonecipher?
This is probably the most difficult decision I've made so far since I've sat on this board, and I've spent hours and hours looking at the Schuler and Shook and the Webb study and what I call the Benham study. I even went back and looked at Johansson and Elliott and what they did in 1992. I am a huge Frank Lloyd Wright fan, and I understand that Johansson was an apprentice of Frank Lloyd Wright, and I love the Price Tower, and I love going to the Guggenheim in New York, and I enjoy going to Taliesin West in Phoenix. I understand the historical significance of this architect. But after looking at the guidelines and spending a lot of time on this with 7200.G1, I keep getting back to the legal significance of should versus shall. And in my mind, it is not functionally viable, it's not economically viable, and it does not provide any quality of life to the people that live in downtown Oklahoma City and work in downtown Oklahoma City. And so I'm going to support the demolition.
I want to make one more comment. I know Mr. Austin wants to make a motion, but I think that's exactly right. I think that we have historical preservation guidelines and we have design and review standards to protect our society and our community. But this is something that has long had a chance to get out of the position it's in, and I cannot support continuing it in its current use. So I'll entertain a motion.
Before I make this motion, I want to say to Preservation Oklahoma and to everybody that works diligently on behalf of historic preservation in our community and upholding the guidelines, which I am very much in favor of, that this is not intended to diminish your work. I know it will feel like that to you, but it is not my intention to do that. I'm going to concur with Mark's position, Nick's position, and move that we sustain the decision of Downtown Design Review Committee in case DTCA-13-00096 for the reason that the evidence supports the decision that DDRC that the building is functionally and aesthetically obsolete and that economically the retention and restoration is not a feasible option for the applicant's purposes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. The decision of the DTRC is affirmed.
Thank you.
There being no further business before the board, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor? We are adjourned.
All right.